Chapter 540. News of the 10,000-year vermilion fruit spread and attracted countless gazes. Along with it, there were many other rumors that were both true and false. There was an underground palace buried in the great Qian ruins. There were spirit farms and countless treasures in the underground palace. There was a cultivator who obtained an extremely powerful Khanate spirit weapon in the ruins. The entire north region was shocked. For the past 10,000 years, the interest of the cultivators of the north region towards the great Qian ruins had gradually faded. Now that this piece of news was spread, it instantly caused a huge uproar. This proved that there might be some undiscovered secrets in the great Qian ruins. Furthermore, the attraction of the 10,000-year vermilion fruit was way too great for perfected Jin Dan. Nobody could resist that temptation. Cultivators from the 4 dynasties of the north region made a move. The successors of many major sects and factions came out of seclusion one after another and declared that they wanted to fight for the vermilion fruit. Even some of the reclusive cultivation gentry clans announced that they would send out their Jin Dan paragons to the great Qian ruins. Instantly, everyone was stirred. In less than half a month, the vicinity of the great Qian ruins was already filled with a gathering of heroes. Suddenly, the atmosphere was tense and filled with a murderous aura. There was only a single vermilion fruit. Who in the north region could obtain it? 15 days later, 2 cultivators arrived together near the great Qian ruins. It was a man and a woman. The man had a thick beard and a rough appearance. Clad in heavy armor, he walked with a majestic gait. The woman had extraordinary looks and a long sword hung by her waist. Her black hair flowed like a waterfall and her white robes fluttered like snow. The man and woman were Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan, commanders of the Azure Falcon Guards of the capital of Great Zhou and Bai Yuhan of the White Hawk Guards. Both of them had already cultivated to the perfected Jin Dan realm and were here on the orders of the emperor. The emperor had a clear understanding of the situation. A month later, paragons would gather at the great Qian ruins and the great Zhou dynasty would not be able to compete at all. Therefore, the great Zhou dynasty did not send an army of cultivators this time round. Instead, they sent Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan to explore the secrets of the great Qian ruins and see if they could encounter any opportunities. There were many sects and factions that harbored such thoughts. Many rogue cultivators had also made their way there, hoping to take advantage of the chaos. Those itinerant cultivators were not strong and would not dare to barge into the great Qian ruins alone. Now that the paragons of the various major sects and clans were paving the way, the malevolent ghosts and otherworldly soldiers were nothing to fear. These itinerant cultivators could also take the opportunity to explore the great Qian ruins. Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan looked at the desolate and mysterious ruins in front of them with hesitation. Under normal circumstances, the two of them should enter and explore first. However, the situation in the great Qian ruins was way too chaotic right now and the two of them had already witnessed many fights along the way. The closer they got to the great Qian ruins, the more tense the atmosphere became. Suddenly, Mu Dongqing's expression changed. He pressed down on Bai Yuhan's body and squatted down, hiding his body in the surrounding weeds that were taller than a person. "Someone's coming," Mu Dongqing whispered. Not long after he finished speaking, figures appeared in the distant horizon. Looking over, there were about 1,000 of them. They were all perfected Jin Dan. Every single perfected Jin Dan wore armor and had cold expressions. The formation of the perfected Jin Dan was orderly and disciplined. Bai Yuhan frowned slightly and whispered, "They seem to be the troops of the great Yu dynasty." "Yes," Mu Dongqing nodded. "A spy reported long ago that the other 3 dynasties have already made their move. To think that the great Yu dynasty would send so many people. Their leader seems to be a Jin Dan genius of the great Yu dynasty, Gu Luonan. So, it's him." Mu Dongqing said with a grim expression, "By the looks of it, the great Yu dynasty seems to be interested in the vermilion fruit as well." Arriving before the great Qian ruins, Gu Luonan paused for a moment before waving his arm and leading the 1,000-odd perfected Jin Dan behind him into the ruins. Boom! Boom! All of a sudden. In the distant horizon, there was a shocking sound that sounded like rolling thunder. It was as if a magnificent army was galloping over. Before long, dozens of ancient war chariots appeared with divine steeds pulling the reins and galloping through the air. The war chariots rumbled and crushed over with endless killing intent. The banners fluttered loudly in the wind. Most of the war chariots had 2 or 3 people standing on them. Wearing battle armor, they exuded an iron-blooded aura and had sharp gazes. The appearance of the dozens of ancient war chariots was frightening and attracted countless gazes. The cultivators near the ruins were shocked. On the fluttering banner, there were 2 words written on it, Tuoba. It's the Tuoba clan. Mu Dongqing's heart skipped a beat. Apart from the 4 dynasties, there were 4 other gentry clans in the north region. They were the Murong, Yuan, Dugu and Tuoba clans. The 4 gentry clans had existed since the establishment of the Great Qian Empire and had a long history. 10,000 years ago, the capital was destroyed overnight and the Great Qian Empire fell apart. The 4 gentry clans broke free from the control of the Great Qian Empire as well. The 4 gentry clans were major cultivation clans with great strength and deep foundations that were even above the Great Zhou and the other 3 dynasties. To think that perfected being Jin Dan of the Tuoba clan would be here as well. I heard that paragons from the 4 gentry clans are here to fight for the vermilion fruit and proclaim themselves as kings of the north region. The person in the lead seems to be the peerless genius of the Tuoba clan, Tuoba Feng. He has a fiery temper and is extremely aggressive. There were other cultivators hiding around Mu Dongqing and Dugu Feng as well as discussing in hushed tones. Among the dozens of war chariots, there was only one in the lead that was pulled by 5 divine steeds that were more than 10 feet long. The horses neighed loudly in a shuddering manner. There was only a single person on the war chariot. He was burly and stood proudly with a ferocious aura. When Gu Luonan of the Great Yu dynasty caught sight of that person, his expression changed and he took a deep breath before revealing a smile. Cupping his fists, he said, "So, it's Brother Tuoba. I've heard a lot about you." That was a common greeting between cultivators. Unexpectedly, the Tuoba clansmen burst into laughter. Tuoba Feng glared and hollered, "Where did this ant come from? How dare you call yourself my brother?" His words did not leave any face for Gu Luonan at all. Gu Luonan was also a top-tier expert of the Great Jin Dan realm and had never suffered such humiliation before. Instantly, his expression darkened. When he saw that, Tuoba Feng burst into laughter. Good, good, good. How dare you throw a tantrum at me? Don't leave then. All of you, stay here. Kill. Tuoba Feng slapped his storage bag and withdrew an incomparably domineering halberd. Waving his arm, he shook the reins and the war chariot rumbled over. The Tuoba clansmen behind him obeyed and dozens of war chariots moved at the same time. The war drums boomed deafeningly. That aura was way too strong and seemed like it could crush everything. Prepare for battle. Gu Luonan's expression changed starkly. How could he have expected that a single sentence from him would lead to a huge battle? Boom! The dozens of war chariots charged into the army of the Great Yu dynasty with a murderous aura and slaughtered the 1,000-strong Jin Dan army into a mess. With a single collision, almost 100 perfected Jin Dan cultivators died and were crushed into meat paste by the war chariots. The leader, Tuoba Feng, was even more terrifying. Standing at the front of the war chariots, he waved his halberd with shocking strength and none of the perfected Jin Dan cultivators were a match for him. Everywhere the war chariots passed, men and horses fell and a path of blood appeared behind them. One after another, figures fell weakly from midair. Chapter 541. It was way too tragic. Even the lives of perfected Jin Dan beings were worthless in the ruins. In less than 15 minutes, the disciplined Jin Dan army of the Great Yu dynasty was slaughtered by the dozens of war chariots of the Tuoba clan, and more than half of them were dead. Corpses were strewn everywhere and tragic cries echoed. The army of the Great Yu dynasty collapsed completely, and the remaining cultivators fled into the distance without turning back. The Jin Dan realm genius of the Great Yu dynasty, Gu Luonan, was even beheaded by Tuoba Feng after 3 moves and held in his hands. With a torrential aura, Tuoba Feng stepped on Gu Luonan's corpse and spat, pursing his lips. What *T genius are you talking about? There's no lack of geniuses in this generation. Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan were horrified when they saw that, and their hearts trembled uncontrollably. Both of them witnessed Gu Luonan release his Jin Dan phenomenon in an attempt to escape. However, Tuoba Feng dispelled his phenomenon with a single strike and severed his head. Tuoba Feng did not use his Jin Dan phenomenon and killed Gu Luonan, causing the Great Yu dynasty to be utterly defeated. Tossing Gu Luonan's bloody head on the ground casually, Tuoba Feng sneered, "You're not even qualified to board my war chariot with that bit of strength." Narrowing his eyes, Mu Dongqing could vaguely make out dozens of heads scattered on Tuoba Feng's war chariot. Most of them were withered and only a few were stained with blood. I heard that Tuoba Feng loves to kill geniuses the most. Each time he kills a genius, he will behead that genius and place it on his war chariot. I heard about it too. He even declared that he would kill all the paragons of Tianhuang mainland in the future and fill up his war chariot. Murmurs sounded from the bushes at the side. Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan exchanged glances and could see the shock in each other's hearts. The Tuoba clan had dozens of war chariots this time round, and there were less than 100 of them. However, they managed to defeat an army of more than 1,000 Jin Dan perfected beings. It was clear how strong the Tuoba clan was. Boom! Boom! Not far away, another group of ancient war chariots galloped over with fluttering flags with the word Yuan written on them. One of the 4 gentry clans, the Yuan clan, was here. Humph. The leader of the Yuan clan was skinny like a bamboo pole. He snorted and said, "Tuoba, they're just some ants. They're weak. What's there to be proud of? Yuan Wujia." Taba Feng turned the war chariot around and shook the reins. His eyes were filled with battle intent as he shouted, "You came at the right time. It's not satisfying to kill some ants. There will always be a place for your head on my chariot." Taba Feng did not say another word and actually drove the war chariot straight in, charging toward Yuan Wujia. "Do you think I'm afraid of you?" Yuan Wujia was not afraid at all. He took out a golden drum from his storage pouch. It looked extremely heavy and did not fit with his skinny body. "Kill!" The 2 of them soared into the air at the same time and roared. The halberd and the golden drum collided with a loud bang, and a heart-palpitating energy fluctuation burst forth in midair. A dazzling halo suddenly burst forth like a scorching sun, radiating boundless light. More and more cultivators gathered nearby, and the crowd exclaimed in surprise. Mu Dongqing was a body-tempered cultivator to begin with and possessed immense strength. Wielding a hammer, he was invincible. However, compared to the 2 paragons before him, Mu Dongqing felt that he was way too weak. "These are true paragons," Mu Dongqing could not help but lament and shake his head. "Any one of them can kill me in less than 3 moves." The 2 paragons of the gentry clans, Taba Feng and Yuan Wujia, fought in midair with endless booms, and it was hard to tell who was superior. Each time they clashed, the voids would tremble. After attacking for a long time without success, Taba Feng was gradually enraged. His eyes shone with a ferocious glint as he channeled his Jin Dan wildly, emitting a shuddering aura around him. It was the Jin Dan phenomenon. Yuan Wujia's pupils constricted as he retreated and hollered, "Taba Feng, are you crazy? You're actually going to use the Jin Dan phenomenon." The Jin Dan phenomenon was the strongest technique of perfected being Jin Dan. Once it was released, it could not be condensed within a short period of time. In other words, if someone used the Jin Dan phenomenon in a battle, it would be a fight to the death. Although Yuan Wujia was not convinced by Tabayi, he still maintained his rationality. The vermilion fruit was not ripe yet. If the two of them used their Jin Dan phenomenons here and used all their trump cards, it would only result in a lose-lose situation where others would benefit. Taba Feng's Jin Dan phenomenon was not fully formed yet. In truth, he was hesitant as well. But now, when he sensed the gazes around him, Taba Feng's blood boiled as he declared coldly, "I don't care. I'm going to kill you today. Stop fooling around, the two of you." Right then, a cold voice sounded in an extremely pleasant manner. Rumble. Boom. Rows of ancient war chariots sped over with a majestic aura, causing the clouds to disperse and the firmaments to tremble. Only the gentry clans possessed ancient war chariots as such. Yet another major cultivation clan had arrived. The word Murong was written on the flag of the war chariot. A woman stood on the leading war chariot. She was tall and voluptuous in a blue palace robe. She did not wear any makeup, but she had a fairy-like appearance and exuded an arrogance unique to the gentry clans. Just now, the person who spoke was the woman in the palace robe. When he saw her, Yuan Wujia shouted hurriedly, "Murong Wushuang, you came at the right time. Take this lunatic in hand. Humph, don't bother about me today." Although Taba Feng said that, his tone was clearly softer. The four gentry clans have been friends for generations. It's fine to spar, but there's no need to fight to the death. Murong Wushuang said indifferently, "Furthermore, the vermilion fruit isn't even ripe yet. What's the point of fighting? Are you trying to make a joke out of yourself?" Tabayi swept his gaze and turned to the surrounding cultivators. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he said coldly, "Who dares to laugh at me? Get the hell away from me." Many cultivators were shocked and retreated hurriedly. Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan took advantage of the chaos and fled outside as well. The ruins were way too frightening. This battle was merely a microcosm of what was going on. There were definitely more battles like this in other parts of the Great Qian ruins. They had not even seen the vermilion fruit and they were already fighting to this extent with blood flowing like rivers. What sort of a bloodbath would there be once the vermilion fruit was born? Everyone was retreating except for a single person who was advancing silently in an extremely eye-catching manner. Instantly, everyone's gazes were on that person. That person was dressed in black and had black hair. He was expressionless and his eyes were emotionless. Wielding a sheathed sword in his pale left hand, he walked towards the depths of the Great Qian ruins. Who is that person? How dare he ignore Taba Feng's threat? His brain must not be working well. He looks like an idiot with a stoic face. He truly doesn't know what's good for him. How dare he challenge 3 gentry clans single-handedly? Far away, many cultivators discussed softly with mocking expressions. That person did not walk fast. To be precise, he was extremely slow compared to the speed of cultivators. Like a mortal, the black-robed sword cultivator walked slowly towards the depths of the ruins, ignoring the many war chariots and powerful cultivators of the 3 gentry clans in midair. Step by step, they shone brightly, as though gods had descended upon the world and were looking down on the world. Who would dare to make a sound against such pressure? Murong Wushuang turned around and glared at Taba Feng, saying coldly, "Taba Feng, don't blame me for not reminding you. You'd better watch your mouth. Don't let your tongue get you into trouble." Ha! After the black-clothed swordsman left, Taba Feng regained his arrogance and roared in laughter. "None of your business. I'll say whatever I want." "All right." Murong Wushuang's gaze was cold. "Since you're so gutsy, go to the Duga clan right now and repeat what you said earlier." Taba Feng's expression darkened as he harumphed. However, he did not refute. Murong Wushuang heaved a sigh of relief and composed herself, saying indifferently, "Don't blame me for not reminding you guys. There's news that the legacy disciples of the 10 upper sects of the North region have all descended. When they heard that, Taba Feng and Yuan Wujia frowned. It's not that easy to claim the title of king of the Jin Dan realm of the North region. The successors of the ancient aristocratic families of the North region might even appear. With that said, Murong Wushuang waved her hand and led the dozens of chariots behind her towards the great Qian ruins. Taba Feng and Yuan Wujia calmed down as well and tacitly chose to give up on the fight and leave separately. In the blink of an eye, the skies above the ruins regained its calm. Ha! Seems like even the paragons of the 4 gentry clans might not be able to claim the vermilion fruit. That's right. Didn't you hear that the legacy disciples of the 10 upper sects of the North region have rushed over? At that time, there'll definitely be a battle between the paragons. Seems like the vermilion fruit is not only a universal treasure, it has a deeper meaning. Whoever obtains the vermilion fruit will be the #1 perfected being of the North region. In another 20 years, the intermediate ancient battlefield will open. This time round, all the major sects and factions will gather and the paragons of the North region will have to fight it out. When they heard the discussions around them, Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan exchanged glances with grim expressions. The situation in the great Qian ruins was even more chaotic and frightening than they had imagined. What are the 10 upper sects? Bai Yuhan asked. Mu Dongqing revealed a reminiscing expression. I heard Jinying Jinjuan from the palace mention it once unintentionally. It said that there are 108 upper sects below the immortal, fiend, and Buddhist sections. Most of them are gathered in the middle continent and there are relatively few scattered in the north, south, east and west regions. There are 10 of them in the North region. What sort of sects can be conferred as upper sects? I'm not sure, Mu Dongqing shook his head. It's said that the sects and factions that are conferred as upper sects require conjoint body mighty figures to hold down the fort. Conjoint body mighty figures. Bai Yuhan's heart skipped a beat when she heard those words. There were 9 major realms of cultivation: Qi condensation, foundation establishment, Jin Dan, nascent soul, void reversion, Dharma characteristic, conjoint body, Mahayana and the legendary tribulation transcendence. The reason why the great Zhou dynasty was able to establish itself and survive for close to 10,000 years was because the king of Great Zhou had a Dharma Dao Jun as his backing. How terrifying would a upper sect with a conjoint body mighty figure be? How many Dharma Dao Jun would they have under them? How strong would the paragons under them be? It was only after truly leaving the great Zhou dynasty that one would know that there was no limit to how terrifying the entire cultivation world was. If one were to enter the birthplace of cultivation where the cultivation civilization was at its peak, the middle continent where all the super sects and factions gathered, how majestic would it be? Chapter 543. All of a sudden, a shuddering aura surged over from the distant horizon. The weather changed. Howl, the sound of a horn reverberated through the world. Many cultivators turned towards the sound and their expressions changed. At the end of the firmaments, gigantic spirit vessels appeared one after another. They were a few thousand feet long and were carved with mysterious patterns that shone with a bedazzling light. The spirit vessels tore through the air with a frightening might. One after another, figures stood on the bow of the vessels with frightening auras. The successors of the upper sects had arrived at the ruins. It's the spirit vessels of Heaven Motion sect, one of the 10 upper sects. The leader should be the paragon of Heaven Motion sect, Long Wenyu. One after another, the spirit vessels and warships flew over the heads of many cultivators, forming huge shadows that covered the skies. Not long after Heaven Motion sect, many more spirit vessels tore through the clouds. They were pitch black and sinister, as though they were underworld ships that floated in the seas of hell. One of the 10 upper sects, Dark Ghost sect. Be careful, don't get targeted by Dark Ghost sect or you'll suffer a fate worse than death. There are countless malevolent ghosts and otherworldly soldiers in the great Qian ruins. Dark Ghost sect has the advantage of terrain. The spirit vessels of Dark Ghost sect sailed into the great Qian ruins. After a while, more warships arrived. The ancestors of the gentry clans were all cultivation warriors who fought on the battlefield. Therefore, when their clansmen traveled, they drove ancient chariots. It was different from the gentry clans of the North region. The various upper sects traveled on spirit vessels. It's the warships of Blaze Columbus Valley, one of the 10 upper sects. This time, the spirit ship that was sailing over was burning with raging flames, burning the clouds in the air into a crimson-red color. It was a sad yet beautiful sight. I heard that the paragon of Blaze Columbus Valley, Wang Yan, came here previously and was nearly killed. Who could be so strong? I'm not sure. Perhaps it's a legacy disciple of one of the upper sects. I heard that even the paragon of Stellar Luna sect, Qian Sinyu, died. Stellar Luna sect will definitely not let this matter rest. 3 of the 10 upper sects have already appeared. The other 7 should be arriving soon. Seems like the rumors are true. Needless to say, the vermilion fruit would appear 15 days later and there would definitely be a huge battle in the Great Qian ruins. At that time, the geniuses would be bathed in blood. Who knew how many of them would be able to survive? This could be considered a test. Only the paragons that survived the bloody battles were the true peerless paragons who would be able to make a name for themselves in the intermediate ancient battlefield 20 years later. With a grim expression, Mu Dongqing pondered for a long time before saying slowly, "The situation is way too complicated and the waters of the Great Qian ruins are way too deep." What do you mean? Bai Yuhan could hear the hidden meaning behind his words. Mu Dongqing frowned. Have you noticed that despite the huge commotion in the Great Qian ruins, not a single Jining Zhenjuan has appeared up till now? Bai Yuhan nodded. She had long realized this as well. The vermilion fruit doesn't seem to have an obvious effect on Jining Zhenjuan. It probably doesn't appeal to Jining Zhenjuan either, Bai Yuhan speculated. That's true, but it's impossible that not a single Jining Zhenjuan has shown up. It doesn't make sense. What do you think? Mu Dongqing said in a deep voice, I'm guessing that the Jining Zhenjuan might have already arrived. What do you mean? Bai Yuhan's eyes widened. Mu Dongqing replied, there are too many factions involved in the fight for the vermilion fruit this time round. Su Zimo was in a great mood after the Khanate spirit weapon was successfully repaired. Wearing his green robes once more, he looked at the little fox before him and could not help but reach out to stroke her furry body. Instinctively, the little fox wanted to dodge. However, she blinked and stayed on the spot, allowing Su Zimo's palm to stroke her body gently. Little fox, the corners of Su Zimo's lips curled as a hint of a smile appeared in his eyes. Do you know, you snore really loudly when you're sleeping. That damned scholar. How could he say something like that? The little fox's body froze and she turned around with an embarrassed expression, biting down viciously on Su Zimo's palm. Crack! The little fox cried out in pain. Su Zimo's palm was fine, but her teeth were almost broken as she sucked in a breath of cold air. When he saw that, Su Zimo could no longer hold it in and burst into laughter. The little fox pouted and blinked her bright eyes that were already covered with a layer of mist. Bean-sized teardrops welled up in her eyes, looking extremely pitiful, as though she had suffered a great grievance. Su Zimo retracted his smile hurriedly and rubbed her forehead, pretending to be serious. But to be honest, your snoring is different. It's nicer. The little fox let out a wail and burst into tears. Chapter 544. The little fox sobbed and ran off angrily with the fire-blocking basket in her paws. Su Zimo smiled and sat on the ground, lying down with his hands behind his head. He narrowed his eyes that shone with a demonic glint. No one knew what he was thinking about. After crying for a while, the little fox hid in a corner alone and drew circles, racking her brains as she cursed Su Zimo viciously. Stupid scholar, why you're truly detestable. Stupid scholar, you're a bad person. You're even worse than that damned crocodile. The little fox had been living in this cave for her entire life and had never seen the outside world or come into contact with anyone. Although she was cautious and paranoid, she was as pure as a newborn. To her, detestable and worse than a crocodile were the most vicious words she could think of. Although the little fox had lived for dozens of years, it was insignificant compared to the long lifespans of demons, and her mental state was comparable to that of a child of the human race. After a while, she felt bored. She turned around and looked at Su Zimo instinctively. Su Zimo's eyes were closed and he was motionless, except for his ears that were trembling slightly. What is he doing? The little fox was curious and crept closer, completely forgetting that Su Zimo had made fun of her just now. The little fox's cultivation realm was not high enough and she could not hear the sounds coming from the palace above the cave. However, Su Zimo had the ability to hear everything. Even though he was thousands of feet underground, he could vaguely hear some sounds coming from the palace. For the past half a month, the underground palace had not been peaceful at all. Furthermore, the commotion was clearly getting louder. With the appearance of the vermilion fruit, all the paragons of the Jin Dan realm of the North region had rushed over. Although the human emperor's palace had descended and Su Zimo had once single-handedly swept through the immortal, fiend, and Buddhist sects in the ancient battlefield, the current situation was not optimistic. Back in the ancient battlefield, he was at 7 Meridian Foundation establishment for the immortal Tao. For the demonic Tao, he had attained greater mastery of the orifice clearing section and was almost at its peak. He was only a single step away from forming a core. In terms of cultivation realm, he was on par with the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist, and fiend sections. Now, Su Zimo was at the early stage of Jin Dan, and his inner core had yet to reach small success. Among the many prodigies who rushed over, the lowest cultivation level was at the late stage of the Jin Dan realm. It was very likely that many of them were at the perfected stage of the Jin Dan realm. In between, there was only a difference of 2 or 3 small realms. Of course, these 2 or 3 minor realms were nothing to Su Zimo, who cultivated both immortality and demonic cultivation. In a one-on-one battle, he was still confident that he could suppress everything. However, if he were to fight for the vermilion fruit, there was a high chance that he would become enemies with all the paragons of the North region. At that time, if all the prodigies attacked together, it would be hard to predict who would win. Even if Su Zimo had cultivated 2 Jin Dan phenomenons, both of which were lost primordial phenomenons, Su Zimo would still be able to cultivate them. However, he only had 2 Jin Dan phenomenons at the end of the day. At that time, if the Jin Dan phenomenons cultivated by thousands of paragons were to erupt, it would be an unimaginable destructive power. Given his spirit energy at the early stage of the Jin Dan realm, he might not be able to afford it. Furthermore, it was not as if there were no Jin Dan phenomenons that were stronger than the soaring serpent and divine turtle. Glass Palace of the 9 immortal sects and Malevolent Earth sect of the 7 fiend sects were both in the North region. If the paragons of those 2 super sects were to rush over, they might truly pose a threat to Su Zimo. Of course, there was something else that Su Zimo was most concerned about. Would Jinying Jinjuan appear for the appearance of the vermilion fruit this time round? If Jinying Jinjuan were to interfere, what would happen to him in the end? As his thoughts ran wild, Su Zimo's eyelids gradually grew heavy. He was truly way too tired and merely wanted to have a good rest right now. For the past few days, Su Zimo's understanding of weapon refinement had deepened by another level after repairing Khanate spirit weapons. There's still 15 days left. It's enough for me to refine a set of 27 supreme-grade flying swords. With that thought, Su Zimo fell into a deep sleep. The little fox had just closed in on Su Zimo when she saw that he had already fallen asleep. Furthermore, there was a strange sound coming from his nose and mouth. It was like the sound of tigers and leopards mixed with a hint of thunder. Humph! The little fox pouted her lips and lamented internally, this smelly scholar's snoring is so loud and he still has the cheek to make fun of me. Although that was what the little fox thought, she did not disturb Su Zimo. She could tell that Su Zimo was exhausted. The snoring from Su Zimo's nose and mouth was naturally caused by the marrow cleansing section. The breathing and expiration method of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness had already been integrated into Su Zimo's bones. Even in his sleep, he was circulating it instinctively. Body tempering section, tendons transformation section, bones strengthening section, marrow cleansing section, organs refinement section, orifice clearing section, core formation section, the 7 sections of the sutra reverberated within his body in a cycle. Demonic chi rose and spread out gradually, thickening. The little fox's big round eyes widened in disbelief as she watched the scene unfold before her. Is this scholar a human or a demon? The little fox's head could no longer wrap around it. When she sensed the demonic chi that was released from Su Zimo's cultivation, the little fox was shocked to discover that her cultivation that had been stagnant for a long time had actually loosened. Hee. Delighted, the little fox leaned forward and stuck close to Su Zimo's arm, beginning to cultivate. There was a pavilion 5 kilometers away from the great Qian ruins. Unlike the desolation of the ruins, this place was filled with fragrant grass and rows of willows. It was filled with life. There were 4 stone tables in the pavilion. There were 3 to 4 cultivators seated at each table in different attire. Some were in Taoist robes, some were in armor and some were in tight-fitting robes. There were more than 10 people sipping tea leisurely, chatting softly with relaxed expressions. There were also many cultivators outside the pavilion. There were about 100 of them. However, the 100 of them stood outside with terrible expressions as they looked at the dozen or so people in the pavilion with deep wariness and fear in their eyes. If Mu Dongqing were to see this, he would definitely be shocked. Be it the dozen or so people in the pavilion or the 100 or so people outside, all of them were Jining Jinjuan. As he had expected, the appearance of the vermilion fruit alarmed Jining Jinjuan. In the pavilion, 3 people sat around a stone table with badges on their waists, Murong, Yuan and Tuoba. 3 of the 4 gentry clans. Jining Jinjuan at the other 3 stone tables had their own symbols on their badges as well. Stellar Luna Sect, Blaze Columbus Valley, Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect, Heaven Motion Sect, 7 Kills Sect, Blood Mist Sect, Mystic Firmament Divine Cult, Dragon Tiger Sect, Shadowless Sect. There were 9 of the 10 upper sects and only Dark Ghost Sect was missing. The Jining Jinjuan in the pavilion were either from the 10 upper sects or the 4 gentry clans. The only ones standing outside the pavilion were Jining Jinjuan from ordinary sects and factions as well as some itinerant cultivators of unknown origins. Among them, even the Jining Jinjuan of the Great Shang and Great Xia dynasties stood outside the pavilion without any objections. Just now that more than half of the Jin Dan army of the Great Yu dynasty was killed by the Tuoba clan, Jining Jinjuan of the Great Yu dynasty was enraged and wanted to head to the Great Qian ruins. However, Jining Jinjuan of the Tuoba clan attacked and killed him in 3 moves. Up till now, the blood on the corpse of Jining Jinjuan of the Great Yu dynasty had yet to dry and was still warm as he collapsed in front of the pavilion with his eyes wide open. That was not the only corpse around the pavilion. In the north region, the combined forces of the 10 upper sects and the 4 gentry clans could almost rule the world. Chapter 545. It seems that the Duga clan of the 4 great clans won't be sending any true monarchs here. The perfected lord of Stellar Luna sect took a sip of tea and said slowly. That Duga Jian is a loner. He was born as a servant and does not have the blood of the Duga clan flowing in him. It's normal that no true monarch came, said the Murong clan's true monarch. He started off as a servant, but he managed to get to where he is today. It's truly not easy for him to stand out in a major clan like Dugu and defeat all the perfected beings of the same realm in the clan. The perfected lord of the Yuan clan lamented. Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect's perfected lord had an unfriendly expression as he barked coldly. That brat is cold-blooded and heartless. He killed a few geniuses under my sect. After the battle for the vermilion fruit is over, if this kid is lucky enough to survive, hee. Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect's perfected lord's words were filled with killing intent. The appearance of the vermilion fruit shook the entire northern region. The 10 upper sects and the 4 great clans came to a tacit agreement and spread the news that Jiningjinjuan was not allowed to participate in the competition for the vermilion fruit. The younger generation would be allowed to compete and determine the winner. Right now, the perfected lords of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans were here to prevent any accidents from happening and prevent Jiningjinjuan from entering the great Qian ruins. The battle for the vermilion fruit this time was of great significance. Whoever could pluck the vermilion fruit would be the #1 perfected being in the northern region. The 10 upper sects and the 4 great clans had joined forces to prevent any Jiningjinjuan from interfering and breaking the balance. Therefore, even if Heavenly Piercing Sword sect wanted to kill Gudajian, they had to wait until the fight for the vermilion fruit was over. The hundreds of Jiningjinjuan standing outside the pavilion were all perfected lords of the 10 upper sects and the 4 great clans. Those who dared to resist had already become corpses on the ground. In this battle for the vermilion fruit, the perfected ones of the younger generation would have to rely on their own abilities. Let's see who would have the last laugh. Right at this moment, the sound of clothes fluttering through the air came from the distant sky. The person who came was dressed in blue robes and was extremely fast. Jiningjinjuan was here again. Jiningjinjuan might not be tempted by the cinnabar fruit, but there might be some treasures in the underground palace. Hundreds of Jiningjinjuan gathered in the pavilion. It was too conspicuous. The blue-robed perfected lord glanced over as he ran. His expression changed and he walked to the side, wanting to go around the pavilion. Wang! In the void, the sound of a sword chime reverberated throughout the world. A beam of white sword light flashed from the pavilion and almost tore the void in half, blocking the way of the blue-robed perfected cultivator. Fellow Taoist, where are you going? Heavenly Piercing Sword sect's perfected lord's voice was sinister and chilling. Come here. Jiningjinjuan is not allowed to enter the Deqian ruins. The perfected lord of the Stellar Luna sect said coldly. The blue-robed perfected lord was calm as well. He cupped his fists and smiled at the crowd. I'm not sure about the rules. I'll leave now and not disturb you guys. You're here, and you still want to leave. Right then, a ghostly shadow appeared behind the blue-robed perfected lord with a black mist that devoured him instantly. Ah! A series of shrill screams rang out. 10 breaths later, a white skeleton in blue robes fell from midair. The black mist dissipated and a skinny old man revealed his true appearance. His gaze was cold and sinister as he landed in the pavilion with a walking stick. The perfected lord of Dark Ghost sect had arrived. At this point, all the perfected lords of the 10 upper sects were present. There were 3 perfected lords of the 4 gentry clans as well. Everyone was already used to the blue-robed perfected lord's death. Everything returned to normal inside and outside the pavilion and discussions began. I heard that an Extreme Foundation establishment cultivator appeared in the North region. Yes, but there's no news of him after that. He must have been killed. This generation is truly not peaceful. There are way too many paragons and monster incarnates. Even the human emperor's palace has descended. It's like the golden era of the ancient era where multiple emperors rose together. The arrival of a great era is bound to be accompanied by calamities. Although we're perfected lords, the path of cultivation is slow and we don't even know if we can survive the calamity. In the firmaments tens of thousands of kilometers away from the pavilion, a translucent spirit vessel that resembled a precious jade sped over. At the bow of the vessel, a man assumed a lotus position. A gentle breeze blew his black hair and revealed an incomparably handsome face. His skin shimmered with sparkles in a breathtaking manner. The man sat at the bow of the vessel with an indescribable elegance. Although his cultivation was only at Jin Dan realm, his eyes exuded a confidence that could suppress everything. Behind the handsome man stood an old man. Young master, you don't have to be so serious. Even if all the paragons of the North region are gathered, none of them will be a match for you." Although the old man was at nascent soul realm, he stood with his hands by his side and said respectfully. "Yes," the handsome man smiled gently. "My opponent will be in the intermediate ancient battlefield that opens up 20 years later." However, with the appearance of the vermilion fruit and the gathering of the paragons of the North region, I wanted to come out and see how capable the paragons of the North region are in this generation as well. "Young master, you're the #1 perfected being of the North region. None of the paragons are a match for you," the old man said proudly. "There's naturally no suspense in a one-on-one fight," the handsome man said leisurely. "I merely want to see if those so-called paragons can stop me from harvesting the vermilion fruit if they join forces. Fufu, my hands are really itching." In the middle cabin of the spirit vessel, there were 2 other people seated. One of them wore a high-collared robe and a mask that covered all his exposed skin, revealing only a pair of eyes that were filled with hatred. Opposite that person sat a middle-aged man with a pale yellow face that resembled gold. "Chunyu, why don't you follow me and not get involved in the fight for the vermilion fruit?" the middle-aged man said slowly. "Don't worry, grandfather. Senior brother Shi is the #1 perfected being of the North region. I'll definitely be in no danger if I follow him." The masked man's voice was hoarse and unpleasant, as though it had been burned. "Yes," the middle-aged man nodded. "That's good as well. Follow him to train and take care of your safety. Keep this jade pendant well. It's enough to defend against a full-powered attack from perfected being Jean Dan." The masked man received it and hung it on his waist. After a moment of silence, the masked man raised his head and grit his teeth. "Grandfather, you must take revenge for me. If not for that Su Zimo, I wouldn't have ended up in this state with no face to meet anyone. Don't worry, that Su Zimo won't be able to hide for long. Glass Palace is the overlord of the North region. As long as he's in the North region, I'll be able to find him even if I have to dig 3 feet into the ground. I'll make him pay 100 times for everything that he did to you." With that said, the middle-aged man's eyes shone coldly and a terrifying aura burst forth from his body in a shuddering manner. Even the nascent soul old man who was standing on the bow with his hands by his side shuddered and turned pale with fright. That was the power of the void reversion realm. It was an entire major cultivation realm higher than him. The middle-aged man continued, "I won't show myself after sending you guys to the Great Qian ruins. There's a great Zhou dynasty nearby. At that time, I'll head over and ask if there's any news of that lad." Chapter 546. The appearance of the vermilion fruit shook the North region and paragons gathered. As the deadline approached, all the legacy disciples of the 10 upper sects had already arrived in the Great Qian ruins. The people of the 4 gentry clans had been waiting here for a long time as well. At the periphery, the geniuses of the other sects and factions were waiting for an opportunity as well. Itinerant cultivators from all walks of life formed a force that could not be ignored. This day. Suddenly, a scorching aura burst forth from the palace and surged into the skies. Instantly, the skies were filled with a bedazzling red light, as though a blazing sun was descending into the depths of the palace, dyeing half the firmament's red. "Ha ha ha ha!" Taba Feng's eyes lit up and his battle intent rumbled as he roared in laughter. "The vermilion fruit is about to ripen. Everyone, follow me into the underground palace to retrieve the vermilion fruit. Let's go." Yuan Wujia waved his hand. Boom! Boom! Ooh! 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 The ancient war chariots of the gentry clans crushed through the voids with thunderous sounds. Banners fluttered in a frightening manner. The spirit vessels of the 10 upper sects tore through the air and bugles sounded in a shuddering manner. Taba Feng, Yuan Wujia and Murong Wushuang stood on the war chariots and looked around. On the rows of spirit vessels, the legacy disciples of the 10 upper sects stood with their hands behind their backs. They were elegant and fearless with a hint of excitement in their eyes. After the 3 gentry clans and the 10 upper sects, paragons from all over the world surged forward like a tsunami. On the ground, a black-robed swordsman was expressionless and his gaze was unfocused. He advanced silently, step by step, as though he could not find a focal point. The strange thing was that there was no one within 10 feet of him. Although the crowd was surging, they parted to the sides instinctively when they encountered the black-robed swordsman. Bypassing the black-robed swordsman, the crowd gathered once more. Within the palace, a sinister wind howled and ghostly shadows filled the air. Millions of otherworldly soldiers were gathered here, forming a dark cloud that was difficult to disperse that blanketed the skies above the palace. Although the otherworldly soldiers in the palace were not living beings, they still maintained their habits from when they were alive. Now that the palace was facing an external enemy, all the otherworldly soldiers were gathered here to protect it. Kill! 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 More than 1 million otherworldly soldiers roared loudly and deafeningly, forming a monstrous aura that surged forward. Boom! The 2 torrents collided with each other heavily. The heaven and earth trembled, the wind and rain changed color, and the ruins of the imperial palace shattered and fell to the ground. On one side were the geniuses of the north region. On one side were the guards of the imperial palace of the greatest empire in the northern region. As the 2 sides clashed, blood and flesh splattered everywhere. Some Jin Dan perfected cultivators were killed on the spot. Countless Yin soldiers and Yin horses collapsed, turning into billowing Yin chi that dissipated into the void. An army of millions of Yin soldiers was indeed terrifying. However, almost all the prodigies of the north region had gathered outside. This was a terrifying force that could destroy everything. The paragons of the 4 gentry clans and legacy disciples of the 10 upper sects relied on their own methods to kill their way into the depths of the palace, crushing countless otherworldly soldiers. Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan were among the crowd. They exchanged looks and could see the shock in each other's eyes. These geniuses were too terrifying. If the 2 of them had barged into the imperial palace and encountered those otherworldly soldiers, they would definitely die. But before them, even the most terrifying heavy-armored cavalry of the imperial palace could not stop the ancient chariots of the gentry clans and the spirit vessels of the 10 upper sects. The heavy-armored cavalry could not defend against the chariots and warships that crushed over and were reduced to dust. Taba Feng wielded his halberd and Yuan Wujia wielded his golden tripod. They possessed immense strength and were invincible in melee combat while driving their chariots. Wang Yan of Blaze Columbus Valley hollered and waved his sleeves. A scarlet flame burst forth and burned the otherworldly soldiers at the front to ashes. Kill! 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 With every word that the paragon of 7 kills sect shouted, his aura would increase and everywhere he passed by, people would fall. Blood Mist Sect's paragon was shrouded by a blood mist the entire time and he could not be seen at all. However, any otherworldly soldiers that approached were devoured by the blood mist and vanished completely. The paragon of Dark Ghost Sect was even more frightening. That person advanced and conjured hand seals with a calm expression. Otherworldly soldiers whizzed over but they seemed to be affected by some mysterious power. The red light in the eyes of those otherworldly soldiers dimmed gradually and they surrounded the paragon of Dark Ghost Sect, listening to his commands and protecting him. Before long, more otherworldly soldiers gathered around that person and formed an army that advanced towards the depths of the imperial palace. The various paragons had powerful methods and shone brightly. Before long, the paragons arrived at the entrance of the imperial palace. Taba Feng did not stop at all and drove his chariot straight in. Yuan Wujia, Murong Wushuang, and the other paragons of the 10 upper sects naturally did not want to fall behind and rushed into the imperial palace like carps crossing the river. Thankfully, the imperial palace was spacious enough such that it did not seem crowded even when the paragons swarmed in with their chariots. Within the imperial palace, the incomparably terrifying scarlet mist that could devour living beings was gradually fading. This meant that the vermilion fruit was about to ripen. There was no longer any hint of green on the fiery red fruit, and it was translucent and bright red. Just by looking at it from afar, one could still feel the rich and majestic energy essence of this fruit. Some of the cultivators circled around with uncertain gazes, looking at the cultivators around them carefully, afraid that they would attract killing intent. More and more cultivators gathered in the imperial palace. With the vermilion fruit as the center, they spread out and maintained a certain distance from one another with wary gazes. There were more than 100 cultivators standing at the front closest to the vermilion fruit. Apart from the paragons of the 4 gentry clans and legacy disciples of the 10 upper sects, there were also paragons from all over the place. Naturally, none of them were willing to back down at the sight of the vermilion fruit. Mu Dongxing and Bai Yuhan stood at the outermost circle, clearly intending to stay out of this. Both of them were truly curious as well. With the appearance of the vermilion fruit, the paragons of the North region were all gathered and vying for supremacy. Who would be able to claim the throne of the North region and obtain the vermilion fruit and become the #1 perfected being of the North region? Right now, although the imperial palace was rather peaceful, it was filled with a murderous aura. Even though the two of them were not involved, they felt their hearts skip a beat. The reason why nobody made a move was because the vermilion fruit had yet to ripen. Once the scarlet mist around the vermilion fruit dissipated completely and the vermilion fruit ripened, an unprecedented battle between the paragons of the North region would break out. At that time, countless paragons would bleed. No one knew how many paragons would be buried beneath the ruins. At the same time, in a cave 1,000 feet below the imperial palace, a scholarly green-robed cultivator woke up from his meditation and opened his eyes slowly with a bright glint in them. "You're finally here." The green-robed cultivator murmured softly with a calm expression, and a murderous intent surged from his glabella. Chapter 547. Su Zimo stood up and accidentally woke the little fox beside him. She sat up and rubbed her sleepy eyes, looking at Su Zimo instinctively. Instantly, she was invigorated. She purred and blushed. Hurriedly, she lowered her head and covered her eyes with her tiny paws, grumbling internally, "Stupid scholar, you're taking off your clothes again." Su Zimo removed his green robes, revealing his almost flawless body. Su Zimo pondered for a moment before a series of crackling sounds could be heard from his body. His tendons and bones rang together as he grew taller. His flesh expanded and even his facial features changed. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo turned into a burly man that was 2 meters tall. His face was rough, his brows were thick and his eyes were huge. There was no longer any trace of delicateness. The little fox stole a glance and was stunned, dumbfounded. How did he change into someone else in the blink of an eye? I must have slept too much. She rubbed her eyes in disbelief and looked again. The outcome was the same. Initially, the little fox was a little flustered at the sight of a stranger. However, she composed herself in the blink of an eye and tilted her head, looking at Su Zimo curiously. Although Su Zimo's appearance had changed, his unique aura had not. The little fox had been by his side for the past few days and was extremely familiar with that aura. Su Zimo withdrew a rough linen robe from his storage bag and wore it. This time round, he intended to fight for the vermilion fruit as the successor of Divine Phoenix Island. Back in the ancient battlefield, Su Zimo had killed countless cultivators of Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth Sect. As for Glass Palace and Malevolent Earth Sect, those two super sects were in the North region. Su Zimo did not know if the successors of those two super sects would be alarmed by the appearance of the vermilion fruit this time round. However, he knew that there would definitely be a fierce battle later on. If he did not conceal his identity, even if he managed to obtain the vermilion fruit, he would cause immense trouble for himself and the entire North region would not tolerate him. The safest method was to use his status as a descendant of Divine Phoenix Island to fight for the vermilion fruit. After snatching the vermilion fruit, he fled far away and reverted back to his original appearance. No one would be able to trace it back to him. Moreover, with his status as the descendant of divine Phoenix Island, he had already offended many top influences. He didn't care about making more enemies. Of course, in this way, many methods that could expose his identity could no longer be used. He could not use the ancient dragonification manual, moon concealment bow, blood quencher, or even the coiling dragon seal. Over the past few days, he had successfully created 27 supreme-grade flying swords. However, the candlelight sword formation was too dazzling and could not be released easily. On the surface, Su Zimo lacked these methods and his strength was greatly reduced. However, in reality, Su Zimo would be even more terrifying after he transformed into the successor of Divine Phoenix Island and donned the mystic gold silk armor. The monster incarnate that shocked the entire Tianhuang mainland and haunted the hearts of countless paragons like a nightmare was about to descend upon the north region. The little fox looked at the murderous Su Zimo from the side and seemed to have sensed something. Su Zimo turned around and looked at the obedient little fox beside him. Although he could not bear it, he still said softly, "I'm leaving." It would be difficult for him to return after this departure. After obtaining the vermilion fruit, he would escape the Great Qian ruins immediately and would not step foot into this place easily. The little fox's round, pitch-black eyes gradually dimmed and she lowered her head slightly, unable to conceal her disappointment. Initially, she thought that Su Zimo would be able to live here with her forever. Compared to the outside world, although this world was small, it was peaceful and carefree. With someone accompanying her, the little fox did not feel lonely. Now that Su Zimo was leaving, she was the only one left. Su Zimo thought for a moment and asked, "Do you want to leave with me?" The little fox had a lost expression and remained silent. After living here for decades, she was already used to everything here. Her aura was left behind on every single rock and corner. Although her mother had already passed away and was quiet on the other side, the little fox's heart would calm down each time she caught sight of her mother. This place was like her home. The little fox had never thought of leaving. Even though she was imprisoned by the scarlet-armored gigantic crocodile, she merely wanted to chase it away one day and not leave on her own. But now, the little fox was lost and did not know what to do, merely looking at Su Zimo in a daze. Su Zimo sighed internally. He could more or less guess the little fox's thoughts. However, he could not force something as such. The man and fox exchanged glances speechlessly. After a while, Su Zimo smiled. "Forget it. Although the outside world is filled with novelty, it's also filled with danger. It might not be a good thing for you to leave this place." The little fox had never left the underground cave and knew nothing about the outside world. If she were to leave like this, it would be akin to leaving an innocent and ignorant girl in the middle of the forest of the vast wilderness. There were way too many people who could harm her. Back then, Su Zimo brought Monkey out of Tsang Lang Mountain and took in Linghu. In the end, there was no news of Monkey and Linghu for a long time after they left the mountain and their fates were unknown. Su Zimo was worried that he would not be able to take good care of the little fox if he took her away. If that was the case, he might as well let her stay here and live out the rest of her life peacefully without conflict. The little fox did not say anything and merely looked at Su Zimo in a daze without blinking. Gradually, tears welled up in her eyes in a pitiful manner. Su Zimo was silent. After standing there for a long time, Su Zimo finally hardened his heart and suppressed the reluctance in his heart. Turning around, he waved to the little fox with his back facing her and strode away. The little fox looked at Su Zimo's departing back view and the tears in her eyes condensed into 2 bean-sized teardrops that rolled down silently. A long time later, the little fox sniffled and reached out with her tiny paws to wipe away the tears on her face. Her gaze was resolute, as though she had made a decision. She ran back to the piece of land where she was born and looked at the corpse of the fox demon silently. Chapter 548. In the underground palace, countless gazes were fixed on the bright red, translucent fruit. Their gazes grew hotter and hotter. No one noticed that in the depths of the palace, there was a tall figure silently approaching. The mist surrounding the vermilion fruit had already vanished. The vermilion fruit was fully ripe. Suddenly, the air went silent. Tension and nervousness. Many cultivators were motionless and merely scanned their surroundings. Beads of sweat rolled down their faces, but they did not realize it. Given the current situation, a battle between paragons would break out at the slightest sign of disturbance. Dark Ghost Sect, Stellar Luna Sect, Blaze Columbus Valley, Shadowless Sect, Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect, Heaven Motion Sect, Seven Kills Sect, Blood Mist Sect, Mystic Firmament Divine Cult and Dragon Tiger Sect were the 10 upper sects of the North region. Tuoba, Murong, Yuan and Gudu were the 4 major cultivation clans. Those factions were everlasting, and even after the destruction of the Great Qian Empire back then, those factions relied on their strong foundations to pass down their legacy. But now, the paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans were wary and did not dare to be the first to strike. Although the vermilion fruit was ripe and placed before everyone, anyone who made the first move would definitely become the target of everyone and might be drowned in the attacks of everyone. Hee hee. Suddenly, Tuoba Feng laughed and broke the silence. The vermilion fruit is right before us. Since no one dares to pluck it, I won't hold back. Surveying his surroundings with a rumbling battle intent, Tuoba Feng wielded his golden halberd in his right hand and strode towards the vermilion fruit with an aura of disdain. Everyone present were paragons of the North region and experts of the younger generation. Even if they were not from the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans, they did not think that they were inferior to Tuoba Feng and naturally had no fear towards him. Humph. Dragon Tiger Sect's paragon harumphed coldly. Tuoba Feng, you think you're qualified enough to pluck the vermilion fruit and proclaim yourself king of the North region? Dragon Tiger Sect's paragon wielded 2 truncheons and strode forward with a domineering aura. Boom! The golden halberd and truncheons collided with a deafening bang and sparks flew everywhere. They were evenly matched. Both parties took a step back after a head-on clash. Dragon Tiger Sect was the only sect that specialized in body tempering among the 10 upper sects of the North region. Back in Tianhuang mainland, the founder of the sect was an incredible figure who left behind the Dragon Tiger Sutra. According to legends, when cultivated to the peak, one could subdue dragons and tigers. There was nothing one could not do. This pair of truncheons also had a name. They were called the Dragon Tiger Truncheons. The mace in his left hand was engraved with fine and exquisite patterns. At first glance, they seemed to be dragon scales. The mace in his right hand was engraved with black and yellow patterns that resembled the patterns on a tiger's body. The weapons in their hands were perfect spirit artifacts. Back in the sect competition of the Great Zhou dynasty, the birth of a perfect spirit weapon shook the capital and countless Jin Dan perfected beings were tempted. But now, the 2 paragons had brought out 2 perfect spirit weapons the moment they attacked. Wang! Suddenly, a clear sword chime resounded in the void. Sword light flashed. Like a blazing white chain, it tore the void into 2 pieces. The paragon of the Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect struck the void with his sword. Originally, there was nothing there. However, under the envelopment of the sword beam, a figure appeared out of thin air. With a flustered expression, the figure flashed and retreated continuously, dodging the killing sword beam by a hair's breadth. It was the paragon of Shadowless Sect who wanted to conceal himself and approached the vermilion fruit. However, the paragon of Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect saw through him and forced him to reveal his true form. The paragon of Dark Ghost Sect tapped his feet lightly and charged towards the vermilion fruit like a phantom. However, he was blocked by a streak of fire. You! The paragon of Dark Ghost Sect had a grim expression. The one who attacked was Wang Yan of Blaze Columbus Valley. A month ago, he escaped from this place by the skin of his teeth. With the help of his seniors, he recovered from his injuries and even improved his cultivation. This time round, he was not only here for the vermilion fruit, but also for revenge. The moment the paragon of blood mist sect made a move, a gigantic star appeared before him. The paragon of stellar Luna sect attacked. The paragons of heaven motion sect, seven kills sect, Yuan Wujia, Murong Wushuang, and the others all attacked in pairs or groups. The situation was chaotic. The other paragons of the North region seized the opportunity to attack. A horse-faced cultivator relied on his speed to avoid the attacks of a few people and charged towards the vermilion fruit. Before he arrived, a blood mist appeared in front of him and devoured him instantly, leaving him without a corpse. There were even some geniuses who were killed by Taba Feng's halberd the moment they approached. The chaotic battle between the paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans was as terrifying as hell, and any cultivator that approached would be minced into a bloody mess. Many paragons present were extremely restrained and had yet to truly burst forth. If a paragon were to release his Jin Dan phenomenon and threaten others, it would definitely cause a chain reaction, and this chaotic battle would be even more bloody and cruel. Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan stood at the outermost perimeter and watched the battle between the paragons with pale faces and shocked hearts. At this moment, the cruelty of the cultivation world was displayed vividly. The two of them witnessed with their own eyes the number one of the great Shang dynasty's Jin Dan being attacked consecutively by Dragon Tiger Sect's paragon with the Dragon Tiger truncheons. That person was only halfway through his Jin Dan phenomenon when he was killed by Dragon Tiger Sect's paragon and died on the spot. At this moment, the geniuses of the cultivation world were so cheap. Only those who experienced this baptism of blood were the true paragons of the North region. It's way too scary. Bai Yuhan said softly, the paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans are fighting around the vermilion fruit. If one wants to obtain the vermilion fruit, they'll definitely have to face them. There's no way they'll succeed. Mu Dongqing nodded. That's right. The combat strength of those people is way too terrifying. Right then, a tall and burly figure charged into the crowd. The burly man wore coarse hemp robes and his muscular arms were exposed. He had a resolute expression, and wherever he passed, people would tumble as he charged towards the innermost battlefield. Another one that has a death wish. Bai Yuhan shook her head and sighed. In this short period of time, hundreds of perfected Jin Dan cultivators had already died on the battlefield. Any paragon that approached the vermilion fruit would be killed mercilessly by the paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans. In the blink of an eye, the burly man had already closed in and was facing off against Blood Mist Sect's paragon. By now, there were already dozens of perfected Jin Dan cultivators who had died in the hands of Blood Mist Sect's paragon. Blood Mist Sect's paragon controlled a blood mist that devoured, corroded and devoured everything. In fact, Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan even saw perfected Jin Dan phenomenons released by Jin Dan being devoured completely by his blood mist. You must have a death wish. When he saw that the burly man had no intention of slowing down, Blood Mist Sect's paragon sneered and released his blood mist, enveloping the burly man. Scram! His voice was thunderous and intimidating. The burly man did not dodge or avoid. His gaze was like lightning as he exhaled and roared. Suddenly, a loud boom burst forth from his body like a tsunami that was majestic. Tsunami blood. The pupils of Blood Mist Sect's paragon constricted and his expression changed starkly. The burly man's blood chi surged and forced back the incoming blood mist instantly. The blood mist that had always been invincible could not even get close to him. The burly man did not stop in his tracks and reached out with his palm that was the size of a banana, slapping the blood mist before him. Poof! A gigantic head flew into the air with widened eyes. The burly man charged through and the blood mist dissipated. Blood Mist Sect's paragon died on the spot without even releasing his Jin Dan phenomenon in time. He died with a grievance. Chapter 549. With the death of Blood Mist Sect's paragon, the initially chaotic battlefield came to a momentary standstill. It was too fast. Nobody expected that Blood Mist Sex Paragon would die. No one had expected that he wouldn't even be able to withstand a single blow from this burly man in linen robes who had appeared out of nowhere and died on the spot. His head was sent flying with a single slap. Many of the cultivators present did not even manage to catch a clear glimpse of the burly man's appearance. A commotion broke out in the crowd. A variable had appeared. "How dare you!" The paragon of mystic firmament divine cult at the side hollered furiously when he saw the burly man charging towards the vermilion fruit at an extremely close distance. Boom! A gigantic divine cauldron descended from the skies with a resplendent glow and a terrifying aura, as though it wanted to suppress all living beings. The burly man's expression was unchanged and he did not stop in his tracks. His bloodline burst forth and two divine lights shone from his eyes. The veins on his arms popped and his muscles bulged like molten steel. A punch surged into the skies. Bang! In the air, there was actually a loud explosion. Is that man a lunatic? To think that he would take on the other party's supreme-grade spirit weapon with his body. He truly doesn't know what's good for him to underestimate the paragons of the North region. A commotion broke out in the crowd. "I'll be taking that arm." The paragon of mystic firmament divine cult had a savage look in his eyes as he controlled the divine cauldron to crush the burly man. The burly man did not dodge or retreat. The flesh on his fist expanded rapidly like a gigantic seal with a thick blood stench. Boom! The fist collided with the divine cauldron with a deafening bang. After a momentary pause, a series of creaking sounds could be heard from the divine cauldron as fine cracks appeared on its surface. Pust! The expressions of the cultivators changed as they inhaled a breath of cold air. The next moment, the divine cauldron was sent flying 100 feet away and its glow dimmed. All the cultivators who saw that were dumbfounded and their eyes were filled with shock. None of them expected that the mysterious burly man would be able to take on a supreme-grade spirit weapon barehanded and gain the complete upper hand to send the divine cauldron flying. What sort of a body was that? Could that man be wearing some sort of perfect or connate glove on his fist? Otherwise, how could he explain the sight before him? If that was the case for the surrounding cultivators, the paragons of mystic firmament divine cult who were in the middle of the battlefield were even more frightened and their minds went blank. Too unreasonable. This punch of the burly man in sackcloth nearly shattered his divine furnace. The moment mystic firmament divine cult's paragon said a single word, the burly man in linen robes had already arrived before him with a suffocating ferocity. Even breathing was difficult. He swallowed back the words he wanted to say. The battlefield was constantly changing. The paragon of mystic firmament divine cult was stunned. However, the burly man in linen robes did not hesitate and was decisive to kill. Wielding a long saber with a chilling aura, he swept it forward. The smell of blood filled the air. Not good. The mystic firmament divine cult Sky Pride quickly came to his senses and realized that his life was hanging by a thread. He did not think too much about it and immediately unleashed the Jean Dan phenomenon. Woo-woo, suddenly. The moment the burly man in linen robes saber sliced through, a sinister ghastly wail sounded in the voids, causing one to feel uneasy and have distracting thoughts. Before the Jean Dan phenomenon of mystic firmament divine cult's paragon was fully released, it shuddered and dissipated. My life is over. Instantly, the heart of mystic firmament divine cult's paragon sank to rock bottom. Poof! A saber beam flashed by. A thin red line appeared on the throat of mystic firmament divine cult's paragon. It expanded gradually before he spat out a blood mist that stained the voids. Mystic firmament divine cult's paragon died on the spot with his throat slit. Ever since the burly man in linen robes appeared, he had attacked a total of 3 times and 2 paragons were killed. Heavens, that person's cultivation seems to be at early stage Jean Dan. What? The surrounding cultivators were shocked and used their spirit-peering arts to check the burly man in linen robes one after another. Indeed, he's at early stage Jean Dan. The commotion in the crowd intensified. Due to the intrusion of the burly man in linen robes, the situation on the battlefield became even more confusing. After killing 2 people in a row, the burly man in linen robes and the vermilion fruit were cleared up without anything else. At that moment, the only people closest to the burly man in linen robes who had a chance of stopping him were the paragons of heavenly piercing sword sect and a black-robed swordsman on both sides. The black-robed swordsman's sword was still in its pitch-black scabbard the entire time. Up till this point of the battle, it had never been pulled out. Each time he attacked, the black-robed swordsman would use a single hand to replace his sword with his fingers and release streams of sword chi to fight against his enemies. At that moment, the black-robed swordsman's initially lost gaze focused when he saw the might of the burly man in linen robes. The moment his gaze focused, it was like 2 sharp swords that sent chills down one's spine. The black-robed swordsman's right hand landed on his sword hilt slowly. He could attack at any moment. When they noticed that detail, Taba Feng, Yuan Wujia and the others sneered internally. To them, the burly man in linen robes was already a dead man. Sensing something, the burly man in linen robes shifted his gaze towards the black-robed swordsman. The black-robed swordsman gave him a strong sense of danger. That person was extremely frightening. It was publicly acknowledged in the cultivation world that sword cultivators were the most frightening in terms of killing. In Tianhuang mainland, the strongest sword cultivator sect was Sword Sect of the 9 Immortal Sections. The burly man in linen robes had fought against the paragon of Sword Sect before, and the feeling that the black-robed swordsman gave him was even more frightening than the latter. Even so, the burly man in linen robes did not stop in his tracks. If he wanted to fight for the vermilion fruit, he had to push through everything with a thunderous momentum without any hesitation and allow the others to react. Where did this dog come from? How dare he lay his hands on the 10,000-year vermilion fruit? Before the black-robed swordsman attacked, the paragon of heavenly piercing sword sect on the other side was the first to lose his cool. He hollered and moved with his sword, arriving before the burly man in linen robes instantly. When he saw the paragon of heavenly piercing sword sect attack, the black-robed swordsman frowned slightly and his right hand that was initially on his sword hilt shifted away slowly. Buzz! The sword trembled and let out a bedazzling glow. 5 spirit patterns shone and a powerful killing intent burst forth from the sword, as though it could pierce through everything in the world. It was a perfect spirit weapon. The burly man in linen robes narrowed his eyes when he saw the incoming sword. The only thing he was wary of was the black-robed swordsman on the other side. However, at that moment, the black-robed swordsman took 2 steps back. It was clear that he did not want to join forces with the paragon of heavenly piercing sword sect. Relieved, the burly man in linen robes spun the saber in his hands and charged towards the incoming sword. Ooh! The saber sliced through the void and the shuddering wails of ghosts sounded once more, as though there were ghosts everywhere. Petty tricks. The paragon of heavenly piercing sword sect sneered and flicked his wrist, causing his sword to buzz. Clang! 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 The sword hummed and released an endless sharpness that suppressed the wails of the ghosts instantly. The ghosts before him were sliced into countless pieces by the sharpness. Chapter 550. The saber and sword clashed. Cling! Clang! On the battlefield, the sound of metal clashing could be heard and sparks flew everywhere. Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect was the only sword cultivation sect among the 10 upper sects of the North region. Their sect's cornerstone sword manual, the Heavenly Piercing 13 Swords, was famous throughout the cultivation world and its sword stance was exquisite. Most of the time, the opponent would be blocked by the Heavenly Piercing 13 Swords the moment they attacked, causing them immense pain. The moment the Heavenly Piercing 13 Swords was released, cultivators who faced it would not be able to fully release their moves. After being blocked multiple times, they would quickly fall into a disadvantage and it would be difficult for them to reverse the situation. However, the burly man's expression was unchanged and he was calm. In his hands, the saber seemed to possess a sentience, and the intricacy of his saber technique was not inferior to the heavenly piercing 13 swords. In fact, it even had the upper hand. That saber technique, Bai Yuhan frowned. In her eyes, rather than saying that the burly man's saber technique was exquisite, it was more sinister. The angle of each strike was extremely tricky, and the trajectory was like an antelope hanging its horn, leaving no trace behind. Furthermore, every slash was fatal. Bai Yuhan stared at the burly man's saber technique for a moment, and in her daze, a series of terrifying scenes appeared before her. There were ghostly shadows, rivers of blood, piles of bones, walking corpses. It was as though the burly man was surrounded by an endless purgatory with countless ghosts and bones struggling and howling within. Bai Yuhan had a pained expression and her petite body shuddered. Bang! Bai Yuhan felt a heavy push on her shoulder. Her body jolted and she came to her senses. Before she knew it, she was already drenched in cold sweat. That saber technique is extremely frightening and doesn't seem orthodox. It can affect one's mind, don't stare at it. Mu Dongqing's voice sounded. Bai Yuhan nodded and felt her heart skip a beat. If that was the case even outside the battlefield, she truly could not imagine how heavenly piercing sword Sex Paragon would feel within the battlefield. Clang! The saber and sword collided. The burly man loosened his grip and the saber in his hand flew out. It circled around the other party's sword and sliced towards the throat of heavenly piercing sword Sex Paragon. This saber strike came without any warning. Heavenly piercing sword Sex Paragon's expression changed starkly as he retreated hurriedly. Shing! The clothes in front of this person's chest were torn, and blood was seeping out. Although the wound was not deep, heavenly piercing sword Sex Paragon broke out in cold sweat. Thankfully, he had retreated in time or that slash would have taken his life. Before he could regain his senses, a figure flashed in front of him. The burly man in linen had already passed by him and arrived in front of the vermilion fruit. He stretched out his hand and plucked the bright red fruit into his hand. Got it! Bai Yuhan exclaimed, where did this person come from? He's so powerful. Mu Dongqing shook his head. The battle has just begun. The vermilion fruit is right there. Just now, these prodigies might have a chance to pick it. But everyone knows in their hearts that whoever plucks the vermilion fruit will become the target of public criticism. You mean to say that, this person plucked the vermilion fruit? I'm afraid he's not far from death. On the battlefield. The geniuses stopped fighting at the same time. Everyone's gaze landed on the bulky man in a linen robe. It's him. Finally, a cultivator in the crowd recognized the burly man's identity. His face was filled with fear and his voice trembled. It's the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island. The burly man in linen was none other than Su Zimo, who had burrowed out of the cave. Taba Feng and the others frowned. Most of the perfected Jin Dan cultivators present were late-stage Jin Dan cultivators and perfected Jin Dan cultivators. Naturally, none of them had seen Su Zimo in the elementary ancient battlefield. However, there were 2 or 3 cultivators in the crowd who were fortunate enough to witness the unforgettable battle beneath the human emperor's palace from afar. The appearance of the burly man in linen left a deep impression on those 2 or 3 people. He was a nightmarish existence. The monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island? Although many of the paragons present had wary expressions, none of them were fearful. All of them were filled with killing intent, wishing for nothing more than to skin Su Zimo alive. To think that even the successor of Divine Phoenix Island would appear for the appearance of the 10,000-year vermilion fruit. Interesting, Yuan Wujia said with a fake smile. Humph. Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon had an unfriendly expression as he hollered, since when did the successor of Divine Phoenix Island join the Fiend Sex? The saber technique you're using just now is clearly the Shura saber of the Fiend Sex. Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon was not the only one. Most of the people present recognized Su Zimo's saber technique as well. Su Zimo's expression was calm. He had expected that his identity as the successor of Divine Phoenix Island would be recognized. He placed the vermilion fruit in his storage bag. Now was not the time to consume it. The energy of the vermilion fruit was immense and he had to enter seclusion to absorb it. Consuming the vermilion fruit in such a battlefield was equivalent to courting death. Now that he had successfully obtained the vermilion fruit, as long as he could escape from this place and shake off everyone behind him, he would be like a fish in the ocean. I heard that you're the #1 monster incarnate in history. Let me see if you live up to your reputation. Taba Feng's battle intent was high as he struck the ground heavily with his golden halberd. The ground tore apart and cracks appeared one after another as gravel flew everywhere. Taba Feng's aura was torrential. To be fair, most of the cultivators present had heard of the title of the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island. However, not many of them were truly afraid of him. Furthermore, everyone present was at late-stage Jin Dan and perfected Jin Dan while Su Zimo was only at early-stage Jin Dan. Murong Wushuang said indifferently, I heard that the successor of Divine Phoenix Island has entered the human emperor's palace before. I'm sure you must have obtained quite a bit of benefits. This sentence immediately caused a commotion in the crowd. The cultivators who had originally wanted to stay out of the matter were now itching to make a move. Who wouldn't be tempted by the human emperor's palace's inheritance? Hand over the vermilion fruit and leave behind the human emperor's palace's inheritance. We can leave you with an intact corpse. 7 Kills Sex Paragon wielded 2 daggers and his eyes were filled with killing intent that was almost corporeal. Ha 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 ha. Su Zimo reared his head in laughter in a maniacal manner. Pointing his saber at the paragons in front of him, he nodded. Good, good, good. How domineering. You want to kill me after I hand over the vermilion fruit. Let's see how many of you paragons can survive today. Fiend. Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon wielded 2 truncheons with a divine might and hollered, this is not the ancient battlefield. You're not in a position to be arrogant. The more I want to be arrogant, what can you do about it? Su Zimo sneered and strode towards the Dragon Tiger sect cultivators with a cold gaze. Anyone who dares to stand in my way will be killed without mercy. Su Zimo's black hair danced wildly and his gaze was like lightning. His aura was domineering as his 2-meter-tall figure charged over like a fiend celestial that could slay immortals. Kill! All the paragons roared and attacked at the same time. Instantly, the voids shone brightly with spirit light. 10 paragons stood in midair in a bedazzling manner like 10 blazing suns. Taba Feng, Yuan Wujia and Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon, the 3 cultivators who specialized in melee combat had already closed in. The halberd, gilded tripod and dragon tiger truncheons tore through the air. The other flying swords, daggers, dark shadow shuttles and other spirit weapons turned into streaks of light and closed in with a chilling intent. Who in the same cultivation realm could defend against the combined forces of the 10 paragons? Chapter 551. Spirit weapons and flying swords came from all directions. Those who attacked could be said to be peerless paragons of the North region. Although they had never worked together before, the moment they attacked, all of Su Zimo's escape routes were sealed. There was no room for trickery and he could only take them head-on. The monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island was way too famous after the battle beneath the human emperor's palace. Even if there were exaggerations and the paragons were indignant, they did not dare to be careless. Taba Feng and the other 2 who specialized in body tempering and melee combat wielded heavy weapons such as the golden halberd, gilded drum and dragon tiger truncheons. As such, they were slightly slower as they sprinted. Many flying swords and spirit weapons tore through the air at the fastest speed and arrived first. Su Zimo gripped his saber with a single hand and his bloodline surged. The sound of tsunami rumbled and his gaze was as deep as the sea as he slashed down viciously at the void before him. This saber slash completely hit the air, not hitting any spirit tool or flying sword. It seemed to be unreasonable. However, after that slash landed, the void around Suzumo seemed to be pulled by some mysterious power. Spirit chi swirled and distorted continuously, almost materializing into a gigantic spirit sea vortex. See Calming Manual, Vortex Stance. The incoming spirit weapons and flying swords were about to pierce Suzumo's body when their trajectories were diverted by the immense power of the vortex. Whoosh! 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 The flying swords brushed past him. Although it was a close shave, Suzumo was completely unharmed. Die! The moment Suzumo attacked, the eyes of Taba Feng, Yuan Wujia and Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon lit up and they hollered, attacking brazenly. The three of them attacked with incomparable precision. It was the moment when Suzumo had just expended his strength and had yet to recover his strength. Furthermore, it was at the gap between his saber techniques. If one were to take a closer look, there would be a gap between every single saber technique. That gap was the greatest flaw of a saber technique. If it was before, Suzumo might not have been able to deal with it, and he might have been killed until he was flustered. However, after being taught by Shura Yen Beichen and practicing the title scroll, Suzumo had already fixed all the flaws in the Sea Calming Scroll. The moment Xiaochen unleashed the vortex style, he did not stop at all. The tide in his body surged, and a new force burst forth. Voila! With a turn of the blade, Suzumo quickly slashed 3 times in a row. In that instant, the blade seemed to have stirred up huge waves that surged forward. The blazing saber light enveloped the three of them like raging waves beating against the shore. See Calming Manual, Stormy Wave Style. After the whirlpool, there were raging waves. Like moving clouds and flowing water, there was no sluggishness, and it was incomparably breathtaking. Clang! 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 3 loud sounds rang out. Suzumo was like an ancient god of war, unmoving. However, the expressions of Taba Feng, Yuan Wujia and the paragon of Dragon Tiger's sect who had just charged up changed as they took a step back. The crowd was in an uproar. He's too strong. It's no wonder why he's the #1 monster incarnate of history. The ultimate techniques of Divine Phoenix Island are indeed powerful. Fufu, it's too early to make a judgment now. Although this person is strong, the top 10 paragons of the North region are not to be trifled with as well. All of them have their own trump cards. If they're forced into a corner, even the strongest monster incarnate of history will die. Taba Feng and the other two had grim expressions. With just one strike, the three of them felt a terrifying force surging like a tide. It rushed into their bodies along with the collision of their weapons, almost causing them to suffer from internal injuries. Indeed, he has some skills. Taba Feng's eyes widened in rage. Not only was he not afraid, his fighting spirit was even stronger. Swash! Suzumo released the plow heaven stride and arrived before the three of them in a single step, stomping heavily on the ground. Boom! The earth quaked. The three of them were shocked. Suzumo did not make any unnecessary movements and merely took a single step forward to release an extremely terrifying aura. That single step seemed as though he wanted to trample the firmaments beneath his feet. Suzumo's aura was domineering. Against the encirclement of the top 10 paragons, he ignored the incoming flying swords behind him and struck first, slashing down with his saber. Swoosh! The sound of a tsunami surged from the saber with a majestic aura. A torrential aura crushed over, as though the Milky Way was flowing in reverse and the ground was caving in. The pupils of Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon constricted. Without time to think, Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon raised his hands and crossed them, slicing upwards viciously like a pair of scissors. You're dead meat. The eyes of Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon surged with madness. If this was a one-on-one fight, he would have released his Jin Dan phenomenon by now. The power released by Su Zimo's saber was way too terrifying. Even if he could withstand it, he would not be able to avoid injuries. However, the situation was in his favor right now and there was no need for him to use the power of his phenomenon. Behind Su Zimo, the flying swords and spirit weapons of Wang Yan, Murong Wushuang and the others were already speeding over. Taba Feng and Yuan Wujia had already attacked as well. If Su Zimo did not stop, he would definitely die. The two of them were extremely close. The moment that thought crossed his mind, Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon saw a look of mockery flash through Su Zimo's eyes. It was as though he could not hide his thoughts from the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island. All of a sudden, taking a deep breath of air, Su Zimo opened his mouth and roared. Fight! Boom! That roar was like a bolt from the blue and landed suddenly. Thunderclap Kill burst forth. A huge gust of air gushed out. Su Zimo was both an immortal and demonic cultivator. After forming a core at the same time as an immortal and demonic cultivator, the power of Thunderclap Kill increased tremendously and reached a terrifying level. Murong Wushuang, Wang Yan and the others who were standing far away shuddered and their spirit energy circulated sluggishly. Even the flying swords they were controlling paused momentarily. A figure appeared a meter behind Su Zimo. It was Shadowless Sex Paragon. Initially, he wanted to make use of his sect's secret skill to approach Su Zimo stealthily and kill the latter. However, he had not expected a thunderous roar to sound in his ears the moment he closed in and before he could attack, causing him to reveal himself. Shadowless Sex Paragon's eyeballs bulged and blood oozed from his ears, nose and mouth. Shadowless Sect specialized in concealment. In terms of head-on strength, they were far inferior to the other upper sections. Furthermore, he was way too close to Su Zimo. This loud roar almost shocked him to death. Taba Feng, Yuan Wujia and Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon were all adept in body tempering techniques and had strong physiques and bloodlines. Naturally, their endurance was much stronger than Shadowless Sex Paragon. Even so, the three of them were standing right in front of Su Zimo and were too close. The impact was unimaginable. The three of them shuddered and felt their minds buzz as they blanked out momentarily. The three of them were dazed. In a battle of this level and in such a dangerous melee combat, a moment of daze was enough to decide many things. Boom! The saber struck the dual truncheons heavily. Under normal circumstances, Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon would definitely be able to defend against that slash. However, at that moment, his strength was extremely weak due to his daze. That slash broke through the Dragon Tiger truncheons in a crushing manner and slashed down viciously. The blade landed on the top of his head and directly split him into two. Splash! His organs splattered all over the ground with a bloody stench. Another Heaven's Pride had fallen. Under the envelopment of Thunderclap Kill, the flying swords and spirit weapons that should have pierced Su Zimo paused momentarily. However, Su Zimo's massacre did not stop. Chapter 552. After killing Dragon Tiger Sex Paragon with a single slash, Su Zimo did not stop at all and spun his saber. After the countercurrent style, it was the ripple style. The extreme toughness of the saber force turned into extreme gentleness without any sluggishness. The saber beam shimmered and rippled. A ripple appeared in the void. Although it looked stunning, it was filled with killing intent as it swept towards Yuan Wujia's throat silently. Poof! Yuan Wujia's ears buzzed from Su Zimo's roar and his mind went blank. Before he could react, his throat was sliced by the saber. A blood mist spewed out. Yuan Wujia had a horrified expression as he reached out and clutched his throat with all his might. However, he could not stop the bleeding. Fufu, Yuan Wujia opened his mouth and let out a strange cry, like a leaking bellows. Stumbling back a few steps, blood drained from Yuan Wujia's face and the light in his eyes dimmed. His legs went limp and he knelt on the ground, dead on the spot. The saber spun once more. The ripple extended, wanting to engulf Taba Feng as well. At that moment, Taba Feng snapped back to his senses and widened his eyes. His blood qi surged and his Jin Dan circulated wildly, swinging his golden halberd and slashing forward viciously. Kill! Taba Feng hollered with a menacing expression. Clang! Su Zimo's strength was already depleted after killing 2 people in a row. The saber was repelled when it collided with the golden halberd. At the same time, Murong Wushuang, Wang Yan and the others snapped back to their senses and controlled their flying swords and spirit weapons, smashing down towards Su Zimo from all directions. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged and his eyes were frighteningly bright. He was unusually calm. Making use of the force from the rebound, Su Zimo retreated explosively. At the same time, his tendons and bones sounded together with a series of crackling sounds, as though beans were being fried. In the blink of an eye, that seemingly tall and muscular body made a series of unbelievable twists and turns. Some of his movements were beyond the imagination of ordinary people and his body was already twisted to its limits, as though it could snap at any moment. However, even so, Su Zimo's figure shuttled through the numerous spirit weapons and flying swords in a perilous manner. Some flying swords cut through his green robe, but they were blocked by the mystic gold silk armor, leaving no mark at all. The sky pride of the Shadowless sect was shaken by Su Zimo's thunderclap kill to the point that he was bleeding from his 7 orifices. His mind was in a mess and almost turned into a pile of paste. Finally, he recovered. He had just woken up when he saw Su Zimo rushing towards him. He was scared out of his wits. Su Zimo swung his saber backhandedly and unleashed the vortex style, blocking the pursuit of many flying swords. At the same time, he extended his left hand, aiming for the sky pride of Shadowless sect. Jin Dan phenomenon, Shadowless twin shuttles. The sky pride of the Shadowless sect retreated immediately, trying to create Jin Dan's avatar. Unexpectedly, Su Zimo's arm suddenly grew to 3 feet long. In a flash, he caught up with him, bent his 5 fingers, and grabbed the top of his head. Puchi! 5 finger holes appeared. The moment the Jin Dan phenomenon of the Shadowless sect's paragon was formed, it dissipated instantly. The 10 heavens favorites surrounded and attacked. Unexpectedly, in just 2 to 3 rounds, 3 heavens favorites died. It was extremely tragic. The remaining people panicked. Taba Feng shouted, "What are you waiting for? Kill him!" Murong Wushuang surveyed the surroundings and said coldly, "If you guys stand by and do nothing, you won't be a match for him even if you join forces when we're no match for him." At that moment, cultivators of Blood Mist sect and Mystic Firmament Divine Cult could no longer hold themselves back when they saw their prodigies being killed by Su Zimo even without the reminder from Murong Wushuang and the others. Kill! 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 Everyone hollered. The sound wave rumbled, almost drowning Su Zimo. Boom! 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 The 100 ancient war chariots that belonged to the 4 gentry clans moved with thunderous hooves and streaks of light on their bodies as they charged towards Su Zimo viciously. Apart from cultivators like Mu Dongqing and Bai Yuhan who wanted to stay out of this, most of the cultivators in the underground palace were already embroiled. Humph! Su Zimo had a fearless expression and a ferocious glint shone in his eyes. Looking at the incoming war chariots, he strode forward and charged over with his body alone without using any spirit arts. Boom! The divine chariots were torn apart. The war chariots were torn apart by Su Zimo's charge. Wielding his saber, Su Zimo's bloodline surged as he slashed left and right. No one could withstand his sharpness. No one could stop Su Zimo as he charged forward. Boom! The voids shook. A golden halberd that shone brightly tore through the firmaments and descended into the underground palace with a terrifying aura. The power of phenomenon. When Taba Feng saw that the situation was amiss, he no longer hesitated and released his Jin Dan phenomenon. All of a sudden, night fell and stars appeared along with a bright moon in the skies. Countless starlight descended, seemingly beautiful and mysterious. However, it exuded a shocking killing intent. A city that burned with raging flames descended, majestic and scorching. The spirit chi in the surroundings had already evaporated, as though it could incinerate everything. 7 kills blood words. As the paragon of 7 kills sect hollered, 7 blood-colored words appeared behind him. They were scarlet and lingered in the voids without dissipating. One after another, Jin Dan phenomenons descended. Among them, there were many ancient phenomenons that were once ranked on the phenomenon ranking. Instantly, Su Zimo was surrounded by countless Jin Dan phenomenons. Jin Dan phenomenons were the strongest methods of perfected Jin Dan. They would not be used easily unless they were forced to. Prior to this, the paragons did not release their Jin Dan phenomenons. On the one hand, they did not expect Su Zimo to possess such terrifying combat strength despite being at early stage Jin Dan and were caught off guard. On the other hand, they were also worried about other variables. They were afraid that the mantis was stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. But now, Taba Feng, Wang Yan and the others had no choice but to release their Jin Dan phenomenons. If not for that, none of them would have been able to stop Su Zimo. Su Zimo sneered. The Jin Dan was activated. Boom! Behind him, a terrifying scene that shocked the crowd rose up. Mountains collapsed and the ground cracked. Volcanoes spewed and dust billowed. Fiery red lava flowed on the ground, devouring all living beings and incinerating all life force. A gigantic living being crawled out from the depths of the ground and leaped into the air. It had a snake head, an anaconda body, dragon scales and phoenix wings. Its eyes were bloodshot and its gaze swiveled. A powerful phenomenon power spread through the air. Crack! 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 Some flying swords and spirit weapons could not withstand it at all and cracks appeared one after another. Their lights dimmed and they scattered to the ground in fragments. Exclamation point. Some of the cultivators were startled by the gaze of the gigantic living being and spat out a mouthful of blood. A ball of flames burned within their bodies and engulfed them rapidly. In the blink of an eye, that person turned into ashes. All the cultivators in the palace were stunned when the Jin Dan phenomenon was released. What is that monster? Bai Yuhan, who was hiding far away, could not help but ask with a pale face. I'm not sure. Mu Dongqing shook his head. He merely sensed an ancient and desolate aura emanating from the gigantic living being, as though it was a divine being that looked down on all living beings. That is, the primordial soaring serpent. Murong Wushuang and the others were shocked. The primordial soaring serpent had been lost for a long time and none of the people present had witnessed it personally. However, the Jin Dan phenomenon before them was exactly the same as the description on the phenomenon ranking. Wang Yan was secretly shocked and lamented. A month ago, the primordial divine turtle appeared. To think that the primordial soaring serpent would descend today as well. I wonder where that green-robed cultivator went. The two of them are like fire and water, they can definitely fight. Chapter 553. The descent of the primordial soaring serpent shocked everyone. Gulp! Gulp! The primordial soaring serpent opened its mouth and sucked in huge mouthfuls of lava. The boiling lava rose into the air, forming a fiery red river that surged into the mouth of the primordial soaring serpent endlessly. After drinking the lava, the primordial soaring serpent's aura turned even more frightening. The scales on the serpent turned bedazzling and shone with a blinding red light, like metal plates that were burnt through. Kill! Taba Feng hollered. Wang Yan had a grim expression and said darkly, that person is only at early stage Jin Dan after all. He won't be able to withstand our combined strength. Everyone, let's not hold back at this point in time. Murong Wushuang declared, that person has entered the human emperor's palace and is the successor of divine Phoenix Island. He must have countless treasures on him. We'll only have a chance if we kill him. Hundreds and thousands of paragons released their Jin Dan phenomenons and charged over. A single Jin Dan phenomenon might not have much of an effect or threat against the primordial soaring serpent. However, the burst of hundreds and thousands of Jin Dan phenomenons was enough to destroy a top expert of the Jin Dan realm, even if none of them were ancient phenomenons or were ranked on the phenomenon ranking. Bang! 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 The phenomenons collided endlessly. Instantly, the Jin Dan phenomenon behind Su Zimo swayed and even produced some illusions. The surrounding Jin Dan phenomenons surged like a tidal wave and collided endlessly. Pust! Pust! The primordial soaring serpent in the void was enraged. It reared its head and hissed as it flicked its tongue. It was only a phenomenon and not a physical object. However, the primordial soaring serpent retained the memories and dignity of the primordial era. It was a divine being of the flames. Divine beings were not to be blasphemed and were not to be provoked by mere ants. Swoosh! The primordial soaring serpent flapped its blazing wings and its eyes spewed fire. Opening its gigantic mouth, it spat out streams of lava towards the paragons around it. Crack! Ka ka ka! Accompanied by a series of rumbling sounds, countless Jin Dan phenomena shattered, and many cultivators were directly swallowed by the boiling lava, leaving no corpses behind as they were turned into ashes. Ah! 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 Waves of shrill and terrified screams resounded, causing one to shudder. Some cultivators saw that the situation was not good and immediately retreated. However, even more cultivators were sucked into the sea of lava the moment Jin Dan's vision shattered. No matter how hard they struggled, they only sank deeper and deeper until they were finally drowned. Only the paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans could defend against the full-powered attack of the primordial soaring serpent. Even so, like Wang Yan's raging flames city, the ancient city was covered in cracks and could collapse at any moment. The Jin Dan avatar summoned by the stellar Luna sect's prodigy had long since disappeared from the night sky, and countless stars fell from the sky. The 7 kills sect's 7 kills blood was only left with the word blood, and it was struggling to hold on. Of course, after that burst, the primordial soaring serpent's glow dimmed as well. Su Zimo's gaze shifted as he gripped his saber tightly and sped towards the periphery of the palace. This was not a place to linger. The longer Su Zimo stayed here, the greater the sense of danger he felt. Go! Su Zimo pointed forward. The primordial soaring serpent behind him leaped into the air, burning with scorching flames as it lunged towards Wang Yan with a murderous aura. Boom! Wang Yan grit his teeth and controlled the ancient city to smash down on the primordial soaring serpent's head viciously. The primordial soaring serpent opened its mouth and devoured the burning city into its tummy. Exclamation point. Wang Yan's expression changed a few times before turning pale and spitting out a mouthful of blood. A month ago, his Jin Dan phenomenon was suppressed by the primordial divine tortoise. A month later, it was destroyed by the primordial soaring serpent. Raging City Blaze was ranked 89th on the Upper World Phenomenon ranking and was definitely considered as one of the top Jin Dan phenomenons in the North region. To think that Wang Yan would suffer consecutive blows. Enduring the pain throughout his body, he shifted sideways and dodged to the side. Although he knew that Su Zimo's primordial soaring serpent would not be able to hold on for long, he was truly helpless and could only allow Su Zimo to leave. You're merely a spent force. 7 kills sect's paragon flashed and shielded in front of Su Zimo. The blood word behind him turned increasingly frightening and bright. The primordial soaring serpent swayed its gigantic tail and whipped it through the air, striking the blood word heavily like a thick steel whip. Piak! The blood word was smashed into pieces and turned into a blood mist. As though he was struck by lightning, 7 Kills Sex Paragon no longer dared to block and dodged to the side at an extremely fast speed. Su Zimo sneered and his eyes shone coldly. Swash! With a flip of his hand, Su Zimo tossed the saber in his hands out, turning it into a streak of light that shot into the chest of 7 Kills Sex Paragon. Exclamation point. The saber pierced through the body and pierced the stone pillar of the underground palace. The saber swayed and countless drops of blood splattered. 7 Kills Sex Paragon was completely dead. Su Zimo had a few more sabers of this grade in his storage bag and he did not care at all. Apart from Dugu Jian, who did not make a move the entire time and merely watched coldly from the sidelines, the other 13 paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans were all killed by Su Zimo. They were either dead or injured. After killing 7 Kills Sex Paragon once more, no one dared to stand in front of Su Zimo anymore. His vision cleared up. Ha 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 ha. Su Zimo reared his head in laughter and sped out of the palace. The surroundings of the palace were dead silent. The surviving paragons such as Wang Yan, Murong Wushuang and the others had terrible expressions. Even the arrogant Taba Feng was silent at this moment. Although the Jin Dan phenomenon behind him was still condensing, it was no longer imposing and dull. The paragons of the North region gathered and they could only watch helplessly as the successor of Divine Phoenix Island snatched the vermilion fruit away. If word of this were to spread, all the factions of the North region would become the laughingstock of the cultivation world. Is it over just like that? Bai Yuhan murmured softly as she watched everything happen in a daze. Mu Dongqing sighed gently. Both of them had witnessed everything. Initially, all the paragons of the North region were in high spirits and were filled with battle intent. But now, they were defeated by the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island and were left dejected. The fight for the vermilion fruit of the North region was finally over. Mu Dongqing murmured, perhaps, only the successors of the 9 immortal sects, 7 fiend sects and 6 Buddhist monasteries will be able to suppress this person. However, I heard that the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island once defeated the paragons of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects beneath the human emperor's palace. Bai Yuhan frowned. Today is different from the past. Mu Dongqing shook his head. Don't forget, the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island is only at early stage Jin Dan. Just as Su Zimo was about to charge out of the entrance of the palace, a deafening roar of a demon beast sounded, as though it wanted to devour the entire world. Roar! A gigantic ferocious beast barged in. It had the head of a Wyrm, the body of a tiger and the tail of a snake. Saliva flowed from its mouth and its sharp teeth shone with a chilling glint, sending chills down one's spine. Tiger Wyrm. It was one of the most ferocious ancient remnant beasts and possessed the bloodline of Wyrms. Through cultivation, it could even revert to its ancestry and transform into a true Wyrm, growing into a ferocious beast. As for Wyrms, they had a chance of transforming into dragons. What was even more frightening was that there was a man riding on top of the tiger Wyrm. When they saw the badge on the man's waist, Murong Wushuang and the others were shocked and exclaimed, Duanmu, an ancient aristocratic family. Chapter 554. In a pavilion 5 kilometers away from the Great Qian ruins. Naturally, the ripening of the vermilion fruit could not be hidden from the Jining Zhenjuan here. This meant that a test for the paragons had officially begun. Outside the pavilion, Jining Zhenjuan from various factions and sects of the North region could still maintain their composure. However, there was a hint of nervousness in the depths of their eyes. There was not much interaction between the Jining Zhenjuan. On the contrary, the perfected lords in the pavilion were much more relaxed. These Jining Zhenjuan were all from the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans and were extremely confident in the paragons of their respective sections. Even if they could not defeat their opponents, they would be able to escape unscathed. These Jining Zhenjuan were relaxed as they sipped their tea and commented. Everyone, Why don't you guess who will be the #1 perfected being of the North region for the vermilion fruit this time round? The perfected lord of the Murong clan waved his folding fan gently. He was extremely handsome and exuded a feminine aura as he asked slowly. The perfected lord of Stellar Luna sect said indifferently, actually, everyone knows who the #1 perfected being of the North region is. Even without the fight for the vermilion fruit, it would definitely be Glass Palace's Shibuya. Instantly, the Jining Jinjuan present went silent when they heard the words Shibuya. This was indeed a peerless paragon of Glass Palace's Jin Dan realm. He had dominated the North region for many years and had never tasted defeat. It was said that Shibuya had the chance to form a nascent soul but did not take that step because he wanted to enter the ancient battlefield and meet the heroes of the world. The most frightening thing was that this person was not even 100 years old. He was way too young. As long as Shibuya wanted to, he could even become a Jining Jinjuan who was not even 100 years old. Furthermore, many Jining Jinjuan present knew what was going on. As long as Shibuya advanced to nascent soul realm, there was a high chance he could kill them even if he was only at early stage nascent soul realm. It was only normal for legacy disciples of the 9 immortal sects and 7 fiend sects to possess the ability to kill those above their level. The perfected lord of the Taba clan was extremely calm. There's no point in saying that. At the very least, there's no movement from Glass Palace and Shibuya. I's probably not interested in the vermilion fruit as well. If Shibuya doesn't come, it's hard to say who will emerge victorious. Just as the perfected lords of the Tuoba clan were discussing, there was a commotion outside the pavilion. Jining Jinjuan took out some talismans from his storage pouch. Some of the talismans were already shattered beyond recognition. Jining Jinjuan's arms trembled slightly. His expression darkened as he shook his head and sighed. When they saw that, the perfected lords of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans smiled with mockery in their eyes. In the cultivation world, there was a so-called life slip. When a cultivator stepped into the nascent soul realm and cultivated their primordial spirit, they could separate a strand of their divine sense and insert it into the black spirit jade to form a unique jade slip. This was the life slip. Life slips were closely related to cultivators. Even if they were billions of miles apart, when a cultivator died and their primordial spirit was destroyed, the life slip would still sense it and disperse its divine sense, causing the life slip to shatter. Therefore, in some major sects, there were pavilions and palaces that stored life slips that were specially guarded by cultivators. Once the life slip is broken, even if the cultivator connected to the life slip is not present, the sect will know that the cultivator is dead. In one of the 4 unorthodox groups of Tianhuang mainland, Chiguramon, a mighty figure created a life talisman that targeted perfected Jin Dan based on the life slips, and it was extremely widespread in the cultivation world. However, the life talisman had an obvious range. The closer it was to the cultivator, the faster and more accurate the information transmitted by the life talisman. If the life talisman was 100 miles away from the cultivator, there would not be any changes even if the cultivator died. Right now, the Jining Jinjuan outside the pavilion were holding on to perfected Jin Dan's life talisman. Those life talismans were already shattered. This also meant that their disciples or successors had all died and were buried in the ruins. Mystic Firmament Divine Cult's perfected lord raised his chin slightly with a haughty expression and said coldly, "You want to get your hands on the vermilion fruit with that bit of capability? What a joke! TSK, TSK, TSK. The perfected lord of Dark Ghost sect grinned and revealed a mouthful of rotten yellow teeth, letting out a sinister laugh that resembled the cry of a crow. I reckon that those brats won't even be able to get past the otherworldly soldiers in the palace. Jining Jinjuan, who was in the pavilion, laughed with a relaxed expression. Blood Mist Sect's perfected lord raised a cup of tea and downed it in a single gulp, saying indifferently, "They're just a bunch of fools who don't know what's good for them." The moment he said that, Blood Mist Sect's perfected lord's expression changed and he swiftly swiped his storage bag, retrieving a destiny talisman. The life talisman was already shattered. Wah, at! Blood Mist Sect's perfected lord watched everything with widened eyes in disbelief. A moment later, a boundless killing intent burst forth from Blood Mist Sect's perfected lord as he slammed the table and stood up in rage. The teacup on the table jumped and exploded. The paragon of Blood Mist Sect who was fighting for the vermilion fruit was the legacy disciple he was most proud of. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come personally and even customized a life talisman for the latter. However, he truly had not expected that his legacy disciple would die the moment the fight for the vermilion fruit began. Just now, he was still mocking Jining Jinjuan who was outside the pavilion. In the blink of an eye, his disciple was already dead. That was the greatest form of mockery. Blood Mist Sect's perfected lord was so angry that his arms were trembling and he was burning with rage. Right now, he wanted to charge into the great Qian ruins to see who killed his disciple. However, there was no way that Jining Jinjuan would let him off. The reason why they were seated here was to prevent Jining Jinjuan from interfering. Blood Mist Sect's perfected lord grit his teeth and surveyed the other perfected lords in the pavilion, trying to make out something from their expressions. Mystic Firmament Divine Cult's perfected lord reached out and tapped the table gently, saying leisurely, "Fellow Taoist, don't be angry. It's inevitable for cultivators to die in a fight. Calm down and have some tea." Blood Mist Sect's perfected lord was about to explode from anger. How could he be in the mood to drink tea? Blood Mist Sect's perfected lord grit his teeth in hatred and glared at Mystic Firmament Divine Cult's perfected lord, saying coldly, "I think it's a disciple of Mystic Firmament Divine Cult that killed my successor." "That might not be the case," Mystic Firmament Divine Cult's perfected lord sneered. "Once this is over, I'll seek guidance from you on your Dao techniques. Do you think I'm afraid of you?" The two of them were at odds and neither of them was willing to back down. Suddenly, Mystic Firmament Divine Cult's perfected lord's expression changed and a destiny talisman appeared in his palm. The destiny talisman was already shattered. "Ha ha ha ha." Blood Mist Sect's perfected lord burst into laughter and mocked, "Your disciple isn't any better." Mystic Firmament Divine Cult's perfected lord was enraged as he glared at the shattered destiny talisman in his palm with a dark expression. In the pavilion, the other Jining Jinjuan were rather calm. Although they looked calm on the surface, they were gloating internally. Dragon Tiger Sect's perfected lord said in a deep voice, "Both of you, sit down. Now that things have come to this, there's no need to get angry." "That's right," Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect's perfected lord said, "For two paragons to die one after another in such a short period of time, it's clear how cruel the fight for the vermilion fruit is." Before he could finish, Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect's perfected lord sensed something and his expression froze as he withdrew a destiny talisman from his storage bag hurriedly. The destiny talisman was much dimmer but it was still intact. Heavenly Piercing Sword Sect's perfected lord heaved a sigh of relief. This meant that his successor was severely injured but at the very least, his life was not in danger. Chapter 555. Before long, the expression of the perfected lord of Dragon Tiger Sect changed slightly as he took out a destiny talisman from his storage bag. Killing intent surged in his eyes as he looked at the dense cracks on it. Immediately after, the perfected lords of Yuan Clan and Shadowless Sect sensed something. By the time the two of them took out their destiny talismans, they had already shattered. This time round, it wasn't just the Jining Jinjuan outside the pavilion. Even the Jining Jinjuan in the pavilion could not sit still. Apart from the Guda clan, there were 13 Jining Jinjuan in the pavilion apart from the Jining Jinjuan of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans. But now, the signs of the destiny talismans proved that 5 paragons were dead and 1 was injured. Naturally, the 5 Jining Jinjuan had terrible expressions. Their gazes were dark and shuddering killing intent emanated from their bodies. The other Jining Jinjuan had grim expressions as well. This was not a normal situation. The 5 paragons that died were from the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans. They were the top disciples and successors of their respective sects. How could they die so easily? Furthermore, the 5 of them died way too quickly. How long had it been since the fight for the vermilion fruit began? If the 5 of them released their Jin Dan phenomenons, they would be able to hold on for at least an hour. However, the signs right now were as though the 5 paragons were suppressed by someone with a thunderous might without being able to resist at all. Before long, a commotion broke out in the crowd outside the pavilion. Many Jinying Jinjuan took out shattered destiny talismans one after another and scattered the shards on the ground. The number of perfected Jin Dan deaths was rising rapidly. Blaze Columbus Valley, Dark Ghost Sect, Murong Clan and other sects and clans took out their destiny talismans as well. The life talisman, which was originally shining brightly, was now shaking violently. This meant that the disciples of their sects were facing a great impact. In just dozens of breaths, the destiny talismans of those paragons dimmed significantly. Although Blaze Columbus Valley's Wang Yan's destiny talisman was not shattered, it was dark. It was clear that he was severely injured. Snap! The destiny talisman on the palm of 7 Kills sect's perfected lord shattered. The expressions of many perfected lords changed. Within the pavilion, 6 paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans had already fallen. Outside the pavilion, there were countless shattered life talismans. What happened in the Great Qian ruins? This did not seem like a battle between geniuses. Instead, it seemed like the geniuses of the North region had suffered a great calamity. Jinying Jinjuan of the Tuoba clan, the Murong clan, the Heaven Motion clan, and the other great clans looked at the dimmed life talismans in his hands with uncertain expressions. It was not just the perfected lords of Blood Mist sect and Dragon Tiger sect. Even they could not sit still. Jinying Jinjuan had a feeling that something was out of their control. Everyone, we should take a look at the ruins. The perfected lord of Blood Mist sect suddenly said with a darkened expression. They had gathered here to let the younger generation have a showdown to determine who was better and to prevent the other Jinying Jinjuan from interfering. But now, their disciples were dying one after another. They couldn't hold on any longer. Although Tuoba Feng's life talisman was intact, it was much dimmer as well. The perfected lord of the Tuoba clan hesitated for a moment before nodding. I agree. Let's take a look at the Great Qian ruins. If nothing goes wrong, we'll let the disciples continue fighting. The other perfected lords exchanged glances in tacit agreement. Let's go. Everyone called out and was about to leave. Suddenly, a massive spirit consciousness enveloped them. Not far away, 2 figures flew through the air. It was a man and a woman, elegant and dazzling like immortals. When they saw the 2 of them arrive, the expressions of the Jinying Jinjuan of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans changed and a deep sense of wariness appeared in the depths of their eyes. Fellow Taoists, the fight for the vermilion fruit is a showdown between perfected Jin Dan. Where do you guys want to go? Although the man's voice was gentle, there was a questioning tone to it. The perfected lords of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans remained silent when they recognized the background of the man and woman. When the other Jinying Jinjuan noticed the expressions of Tuoba Feng and the others, their hearts skipped a beat as well and they chose to remain silent. However, not everyone had the same foresight. The Jinying Jinjuan outside the pavilion came from all over the North region. Some of them were from small sects while others were itinerant cultivators. Everyone was already frustrated from being trapped here. When they saw the man and woman in ancient attire, the Jinying Jinjuan could not help but sneer coldly, "Where are these old fogies from? State your names." Fufu. The man smiled leisurely and spat out 2 words gently, Duanmu. Duanmu? The Jinying Jinjuan who spoke was stunned for a moment and could not react in time. However, a series of gasps could be heard from the crowd. Jinying Jinjuan of the Duanmu aristocratic family is here as well. If the Duanmu aristocratic family is here, the one beside him should be another ancient aristocratic family, the Ouyang family. The Jinying who spoke had an ashen expression and was so scared that he was trembling. In Tianhuang mainland, there were factions that were passed down from the ancient era and kept a low profile. Among them, there were some ancient aristocratic families. Although many cultivators had not heard of the names of those aristocratic families, it was undeniable that they had a strong foundation and unfathomable strength. Among the ancient aristocratic families, the three strongest aristocratic families were the famous aristocratic families of the cultivation world, the Dongfang family, Nangong family, and Shimen family. The top factions of Tianhuang mainland were the 9 immortal sects, 8 demon races, 7 fiend sects, 6 Buddhist monasteries, 5 heretical doctrines, 4 unorthodox groups and the 3 aristocratic families. There were 2 ancient aristocratic families in the north region, Duanmu and Ouyang. Although the 2 ancient aristocratic families were not as strong as the 3 aristocratic families in terms of reputation, they were definitely above the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans. It was only because they were high and mighty and had been in seclusion for many years that cultivators at the bottom could not come into contact with them, and very few people knew about them. Take Misty Peak for example. Although it was one of the 5 major sects of the Great Zhou dynasty, there were not many people in the sect who had heard of the Duanmu and Ouyang aristocratic families. They might not even come into contact with them in their entire lives. To think that the appearance of the vermilion fruit this time round would alarm both of the ancient aristocratic families. Suddenly, the perfected lord of Duanmu clan extended his hand and dermic powers surged, forming a gigantic palm in midair that grabbed Jinying who just now had spoken rudely. Poof! That person could not even make a sound and was crushed into a blood mist with his essence spirit destroyed. Does anyone else have any objections? The perfected lord of Duanmu clan surveyed the surroundings and asked with a smile. It was silent both inside and outside the pavilion, and one could hear a pin drop. This was the might of the ancient aristocratic families. They could kill with a smile, and the crowd was silent out of fear. Jinying of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans revealed indignant expressions. Although he did not dare to say it out loud, he cursed internally. At the same time, the doubts in their hearts were finally resolved. It was no wonder why so many paragons died right after the fight for the vermilion fruit began. Even the paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans suffered heavy casualties. It was because the 2 ancient aristocratic families of the north region had stepped in. It was clear how frightening the successors of the 2 ancient aristocratic families were just by looking at the 2 Jinying. The 2 ancient aristocratic families had been in seclusion for many years. This time round, they were definitely bent on obtaining the vermilion fruit. Chapter 556. At the entrance of the underground palace. A young man rode on a massive and menacing tiger Wyrm and blocked Su Zimo's path. The man was extremely handsome, and although his clothes were elegant, they were extremely ancient and did not seem like someone from this era, as though he was from the ancient era. Su Zimo maintained his soaring serpent phenomenon and sped forward. He could vaguely hear the exclamations from the crowd behind him. Ancient aristocratic family, Duanmu? Su Zimo knew nothing about ancient aristocratic families. However, he could sense the reactions of the successors of the upper sects and major cultivation clans of the north region. It was clear that this ancient aristocratic family had a powerful background. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged. No matter who it was, he had to leave this place as soon as possible. Humph! When the handsome man saw that Su Zimo ignored him and continued sprinting out of the palace, he could not help but sneer coldly. "You're still thinking of escaping when I, Duanmu Kong, am here?" With that said, the handsome man named Duanmu Kong patted the neck of the demon beast beneath him. Roar! The tiger Wyrm understood and let out a deafening roar. Its tail swung towards Su Zimo viciously. Bang! The tiger Wyrm's tail was covered in scales that were incomparably tough. Su Zimo's Jin Dan phenomenon was already at the end of its tether after being attacked by hundreds and thousands of phenomenons. Coupled with the immense impact, the primordial soaring serpent swayed and its light dimmed, it could dissipate at any moment. Su Zimo's figure was forced to stop. Right then, an extremely pleasant phoenix cry sounded from the other side of the entrance of the palace. In the blink of an eye, a green wand flew in. Its wings shone with a mysterious luster that was bedazzling and emitted a terrifying aura. It was even stronger than the tiger Wyrm. Green wand. If the tiger Wyrm had to cultivate to become a ferocious beast, then, this green wand was a pure-blooded ferocious beast to begin with. A peerlessly beautiful woman sat atop the green wand. She was indescribably noble and had a cold expression. There was a hint of arrogance between her brows, as though she did not take all the paragons here seriously. Putting aside the woman on the green wand, just the pure-blooded ferocious beast alone was troublesome for many paragons. It should be another ancient aristocratic family, Ouyang. There are only these two primordial aristocratic clans in the northern region, the Duanmu clan and the Ouyang clan. It is said that the two aristocratic clans have been on good terms for generations. Hearing the discussion behind him, Su Zimo already knew what was going on. Duanmu Kang glanced sideways and said with a smile, "Xiaoyu, why did you come here personally?" "I've said it before, I'll definitely get the vermilion fruit and bring it back to you." "No need." Ouyang Xiaoyu said indifferently. She did not appreciate his kindness at all. Duanmu Kang said, "Xiaoyu, as long as it's something you like, not to mention a vermilion fruit, even if it's a star in the sky, I'll do everything I can to pluck it for you." Ouyang Xiaoyu frowned. She knew Duanmu Kang too well. Duanmu Kang had said these words to at least 100 female cultivators. "Young master, he seems to be that monstrous genius from Divine Phoenix Island." At that instant, a cultivator following behind Duanmu Kang spoke with a stern expression. "A monstrous genius of Divine Phoenix Island? Which monster?" Duanmu Kang was slightly stunned. "The one who suppressed the experts of the immortal, Buddhist and fiend sects below the human emperor's palace. It's him." Duanmu Kang froze for a moment before smiling gently and nodding. "No wonder." A look of surprise flashed through Ouyang Xiaoyu's eyes when she heard the words monstrous genius of Divine Phoenix Island. Thereafter, she glared at Su Zimo with a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Sweeping his gaze across the battlefield, Duanmu Kang's gaze finally landed on Su Zimo as he chuckled. "The primordial soaring serpent has been lost for a long time. I was wondering who it was that could cultivate such a phenomenon. Seems like you do have some background. Cut the crap and make way." Although Su Zimo's voice was calm, there was a hint of coldness in it. Even against the successors of two ancient aristocratic families, the paragons could not see any emotions on his face. Su Zimo was trying his best to recover his blood qi and spirit energy. "Make way for me." Duanmu Kang froze for a moment before rearing his head in laughter, as though he had just heard the greatest joke in the world. "Ha ha ha ha. Interesting. How arrogant." As Duanmu Kang laughed, his expression darkened as he said coldly, "The primordial soaring serpent has been lost for a long time and nobody knows how strong it is now. However, my Jin Dan phenomenon was ranked 34th in the previous phenomenon ranking." All the paragons were shocked. There were only 108 positions on the phenomenon ranking and the higher one was, the stronger their phenomenons were. The Jin Dan phenomenons that could squeeze into the top 36 were all terrifying phenomenons that had been passed down through the ages. Duanmu Kang said coldly, "Don't forget, you're only at early stage Jin Dan. How long can the spirit energy in your Dantian last? Let's see how many of my attacks this lousy phenomenon of yours can withstand." Jin Dan phenomenon, grass and tree soldiers. Duanmu Kang's Jin Dan circulated and with a wave of his hand, the grass around the palace seemed to have gained sentience and turned into countless divine weapons in a dense cluster. Swoosh! 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 The divine weapons surged over with a majestic aura. In reality, Duanmu Kang's Jin Dan phenomenon would be even more terrifying if it was placed in a place with lush vegetation. Thousands of divine weapons appeared and blanketed the skies in an endless manner. This was the Great Qian Ruins and it was barren outside. However, there were still weeds growing within the palace due to the influence of the medicinal field. Although the weeds did not form much, they still formed hundreds of divine weapons that tore through the air. Su Zimo gripped his fists gently. If he was at his peak, even if he was at early stage Jin Dan, he was 90% confident that he could suppress the other party's grass and tree soldiers with the primordial soaring serpent. But now, he was way too drained. The primordial soaring serpent was also at the end of its tether after receiving too many phenomenons. There was no way it could withstand the impact of grass and tree soldiers. At that thought, Su Zimo made up his mind. Snap! There was a deafening sound. The firmaments above Su Zimo's head shattered and countless torrents and meteors rained down in an apocalyptic manner. What's that? The paragons were confused. The primordial soaring serpent behind Su Zimo had yet to dissipate. Why was there another phenomenon? Could it be? Something's not right. Duanmu Kang was the successor of an ancient aristocratic family after all and was the first to notice it as he murmured in disbelief, twin phenomenons? Boom! Hundreds of divine weapons struck the Jin Dan phenomenon behind Su Zimo. The seam behind Su Zimo swayed but the hundreds of divine weapons were repelled. Duanmu Kang noticed that something was amiss and said hurriedly, Xiaoyu, let's join forces. Before Duanmu Kang could say anything, Ouyang Xiaoyu had already realized something and channeled Jin Dan, hollering, Jin Dan phenomenon, wind frost saber sword. Coldness filled the air. The temperature in the underground palace dipped instantly. The raging winds howled like swords and sabers. In fact, frost began to form on the torrents that appeared behind Su Zimo. The initially violent torrents were frozen as well. The paragons of Heaven Motion Sect, Dark Ghost Sect and the others seized the opportunity to charge forward as well. They channeled the remnants of Jin Dan phenomenons, wanting to kill Su Zimo completely. Bang! 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 There was a deafening bang. A massive creature suddenly descended on the vast land with a shell that supported the shattered firmaments. Its four legs were like heavenly pillars that crushed the ice that formed on the torrents. The divine turtle descended and roared into the skies. Instantly, a torrential wave surged. Chapter 557. Poof! 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 Some of the perfected being Jin Dan who rushed forward to add insult to injury were locked down by the terrifying power of phenomenon the moment they closed in. Their bodies were torn into pieces and they died on the spot. Nearby, figures exploded one after another into blood mists that resembled gorgeous fireworks that were tragic and gory. Far away, figures fell from midair one after another. Their gazes were unfocused and their life force was extinguished. They were like raindrops that fell from the skies and returned to the ground. It was an extremely shocking scene. Mu Dongqing, Bai Yuhan and the other cultivators who chose to stay out of it were stunned on the spot. Their eyes were filled with fear and their bodies trembled uncontrollably. Everyone did not have the time to think about why two phenomenons would appear behind Su Zimo. They were stunned by the terrifying power released by the two phenomenons. It was way too scary. How could the power released by the same perfected being Jin Dan be so strong that it was almost unstoppable? The monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island stood in midair with a divine turtle behind him. He had a domineering aura and a gaze that was like lightning, resembling an unparalleled divine being that burned with raging flames. The surrounding paragons of the North region seemed insignificant in the face of that divine being. Like moths, they lunged towards the divine being and turned into ashes in midair. Initially, Jin Dan's phenomenon remained beside the paragon of Heaven Motion Sect. However, when the black tortoise descended and roared at the sky, his phenomenon shattered with a bang. The next moment, the immense power of phenomenon surged into his body and destroyed his life force. Exclamation point. The paragon of heaven motion sect spat out a large mouthful of blood that was black in color. His organs were already penetrated by the power of phenomenon and turned into a pile of mush. The paragon of heaven motion sect's gaze dimmed and his life force drained rapidly without any way to reverse it. Another paragon had fallen. The Jin Dan phenomenon of dark ghost sect's paragon was still around and countless otherworldly soldiers behind him roared as they charged. Their eyes were bloodshot and their iron spears shone with a cold glint, as though they could destroy everything before them. However, after the divine turtle descended, all the horses were silent. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the sky. Bolts of divine thunder descended on the shell, causing sparks to fly everywhere. It was impossible to penetrate the shell. Instead, it made the divine turtle look even more majestic. However, when these bolts of lightning landed on the sky prides of the Een ghost sect, they were devastating. The power of lightning was the most righteous and violent, and it was extremely effective against evil spirits and ghosts. No matter how ferocious and evil a malicious spirit was, it would still be reduced to ashes after being struck by the heavenly lightning. Crack! Lightning flashed. The heaven's favorite of the Een ghost sect screamed in agony as he was struck by the lightning. Black smoke rose from his body as he fell from the sky, dead. Above the sky prides of the stellar Luna sect, there were still some remnant stars. Starlight fell from the sky, and the killing intent was piercingly cold. The divine turtle roared. Countless stars fell. The genius of the stellar Luna sect had fallen. In the blink of an eye, only Taba Feng, Wang Yan of Blaze Columbus Valley, Murong Wushuang, and the paragon of heavenly piercing sword sect were left of the paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans and Dugu Jian who had yet to make a move. Countless geniuses had died in the palace. The casualties were heavy. This battle between prodigies was much more tragic than what everyone had initially imagined. It's the primordial divine turtle. Heavens, that primordial phenomenon has appeared once more. Twin phenomenons and the coexistence of a turtle and serpent. How did that person manage to do it? Furthermore, both Jin Dan phenomenons are so strong and terrifying. The raging city blaze behind Wang Yan of Blaze Columbus Valley had already shattered as well. Thankfully, he retreated first when he saw that the situation was amiss. When he saw the firmaments shattering, lightning flashing, torrential currents gushing and meteors crashing down, he realized something. For the past month, that scene had been tormenting him repeatedly like a nightmare. Most cultivators were not that lucky. The primordial divine turtle had been lost for a long time. Before the divine turtle descended, most of the Jin Dan paragons could not recognize it, let alone the others. Even the Jining Jinjuan of the various regions might not be able to recognize the origin of that phenomenon. Everyone swarmed forward, wanting to surround and kill Su Zimo so that they could snatch the treasures in the chaos. Unfortunately, the descent of the divine turtle accompanied by the primordial soaring serpent and the might of the twin phenomenons was not something they could defend against. Against the twin phenomenons, only the successors of the ancient aristocratic families, Duanmu Kang and Ouyang Xiaoyu, could hold on. Twin phenomenons. He's truly a monster incarnate. Duanmu Kang's handsome face was already somewhat menacing as he grit his teeth. It's a pity that you're going to be buried in these ruins today. The twin phenomenons were strong. However, Su Zimo could not hold on for long. The consumption of spirit energy by the twin phenomenons was way too great. At that moment, Su Zimo's inadequacies in terms of cultivation realm were finally highlighted. Up till this point of the battle, Su Zimo had not fallen into a disadvantage in terms of combat strength. Instead, he was incomparably domineering and suppressed everything. However, his spirit energy was not as dense as a late-stage Jin Dan or perfected Jin Dan at the end of the day. Furthermore, the consumption of spirit energy was even more frightening if he wanted to support two primordial phenomenons. Right now, the spirit energy in Su Zimo's dantian was almost depleted. Even the Jin Dan felt a faint stinging pain and its circulation slowed down gradually. As the successor of an ancient aristocratic family, Duanmu Kang was discerning and could clearly see through Su Zimo's situation. He channeled Jin Dan furiously and the power of his phenomenon surged forth. Countless divine weapons conjured from plants hovered in front of Su Zimo, trembling slightly. On the other side, Ouyang Xiaoyu's wind frost saber sword was also tearing at the turtle serpent phenomenon. The primordial soaring serpent was already at the end of its tether to begin with and could not hold on any longer. Now that it was struck as such, it was on the verge of collapse. A series of cracks appeared on the soaring serpent's body and it could collapse at any moment. As for the primordial divine turtle, although it was still extraordinary, the glow on its body dimmed gradually as Su Zimo's spirit energy was depleted. He can't hold on much longer. Far away, Mu Dongqing could also tell the direction of the battle and said in a deep voice, once that person's Jin Dan phenomenon collapses, the countless weapons and wind frost saber sword will be able to pierce through him instantly. Bai Yuhan nodded with a conflicted expression. Instead of saying that the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island was defeated by the two successors of ancient aristocratic families, it's more accurate to say that he was defeated by the combined forces of all the paragons of the North region. That's right. If not for the fact that the paragons were exhausting him, there's no way those two successors of ancient aristocratic families could have defended against him. Pausing for a moment, Mu Dongqing sighed and lamented, what a pity. If that person were to cultivate to late-stage Jin Dan and perfected Jin Dan, even the combined forces of the paragons of the North region wouldn't be able to suppress him. The tallest tree in the forest will be the first to be destroyed. A cultivator at the side sneered, that person's edge is too sharp and he's too rigid. It's only natural for him to end up like this. Right then, something seemed to have happened on the battlefield. Paragons? Monster incarnate? All of you, die. Duanmu Kang hollered and circulated the Jin Dan within his body to its limits. Countless weapons tore through the phenomenons and closed in on Su Zimo's body. Fu. In midair, Su Zimo suddenly burst into laughter. You guys want to kill me with just the two of you? Su Zimo's eyes shone fiercely. The two of you are way too naive. Chapter 558. The reappearance of the two primordial phenomenons with the tortoise and serpent coexisting was a rare sight. Unfortunately, Su Zimo was at early stage Jin Dan and his spirit energy was already depleted after fighting against the paragons of the North region consecutively and conjured two phenomenons. Even so, he was not afraid at all. Right in front of countless gazes, the two dimmed primordial divine beings in midair suddenly collided violently under the guidance of a certain power. Boom! A shuddering power burst forth. Silence ensued. It was not truly silent. Instead, a deafening sound drowned out everything, as though the apocalypse had arrived. The many divine weapons and frost sabers that were about to reach Su Zimo shattered into dust. Duanmu Kang and Ouyang Xiaoyu were shocked and shuddered as though they were struck by lightning. Both of them spat out mouthfuls of blood and fell from midair. Both of their Jin Dan phenomenons had already shattered. The divine turtle was a divine being of water. The soaring serpent was a divine being of fire. Fire and water were incompatible. The collision of the two phenomenons was no different from a massive battle between divine beings. At the same time that they perished together, an extremely terrifying killing power burst forth. This was no longer a pure power of phenomenons. It also contained a clash of the origins of Tao techniques and the truths of the great Tao. Su Zimo's process of breaking through to the Jin Dan realm was not smooth. Due to the constant clashes of fire and water in his dantian, he suffered way too much. His flesh was torn apart and healed time and time again. In the end, he even nearly exploded and died. In the end, the two powers of fire and water were temporarily balanced such that the tortoise and serpent could coexist. However, he could clearly sense that once the two powers collided, an extremely terrifying might would burst forth. At that moment, a flash of insight surged into his mind and led to the collision of the tortoise and serpent today. In this collision, the two primordial phenomenons of the divine turtle and soaring serpent dissipated. However, Duanmu Kang and Ouyang Xiaoyu were in an even worse state. The two phenomenons of grass tree soldiers and frost saber and sword collapsed instantly, and the two of them suffered an immense impact. The spirit energy in their dantians was chaotic and the two of them almost lost their combat strength. Ha! Su Zimo grinned and strode forward, hollering, "Hand over your lives." Ta! Ta! In just a few steps, Su Zimo had already caught up to the retreating Duanmu Kang. He stretched out his huge palm, which was filled with flesh and blood and exposed veins, and fiercely pressed down. Quick! Duanmu Kang had a panicked expression as he tried his best to calm himself down. He immediately summoned his flying sword. The sword shone brightly like a dragon as it soared into the sky and pierced towards the palm that was coming down. Clang clang clang. Su Zimo's expression did not change as he did not dodge or retreat. Suddenly, 5 fingernails shot out from his fingertips, shimmering with a cold glint. Like blades, they caught Duanmu Kang's flying sword instantly. Even a flood dragon would not be able to escape from Su Zimo's palm. Su Zimo's palm suddenly softened. Like a smooth ox's tongue, it coiled around the sword and shook. Crack! This flying sword was directly rolled into a pile of fragments by Su Zimo's palm and scattered on the ground. Is this all that the successor of an ancient aristocratic family has? Su Zimo sneered and strode forward, arriving before Duanmu Kang instantly. Duanmu Kang's face was pale but he did not give up. Ignoring the pain in his dantian, he channeled spirit energy furiously and shrieked, "I'll show you the secret skill of my Duanmu aristocratic family." Plant entanglement. Duanmu Kang pointed forward. Spirit energy gushed out from his fingertips and wild plants suddenly appeared. They were thin and tough with sharp edges, resembling soft swords as they coiled towards Su Zimo. Although they were plants, their sharpness was not weaker than divine weapons. Even ancient remnant beasts would be doomed if they were entangled by them. If ordinary demon beasts were entangled by the plants, they would have been sliced into minced meat. The plants grew wildly and surrounded Su Zimo instantly. Roar! At the same time, the tiger Wyrm roared and lunged towards Su Zimo with menacing fangs and claws. Die! Duanmu Kang's face was contorted as he controlled the growing plants to entangle Su Zimo repeatedly, wanting to restrain the latter. However, to his shock, he discovered that the sharp plants did not leave any wounds on Su Zimo's body at all. There wasn't even a single mark. Even supreme-grade spirit weapons might not be able to pierce Su Zimo's flesh, let alone plants created by spirit arts. How dare you embarrass yourself with such a dog-T secret skill? Channeling his bloodline, Su Zimo's body rumbled with the sound of a tsunami and his flesh expanded, causing his entire body to expand. Thud! 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 With a series of noises, the plants were torn apart and Su Zimo broke free. At the same time, the tiger Wyrm chomped over with its mouth wide open with a blood stench, as though it wanted to devour Su Zimo's head. A cold glint flashed through Su Zimo's eyes as he reached out with both hands and grabbed the tiger Wyrm's jaws tightly. Both sides wrestled. Shing! After a brief stalemate, there was a chilling sound and blood chi surged into the air. The tiger Wyrm was ripped into two from the middle by Su Zimo's jaws. Its organs that were stained with blood splattered all over the ground in a nauseating manner. The crowd was shocked. How much strength did it take to rip the tiger Wyrm apart? Duanmu Kang was truly frightened this time round. Bathed in blood, Su Zimo strode over in huge strides like a fiend celestial that had just walked out of hell. Filled with killing intent, he arrived before them in the blink of an eye. Scared out of his wits, Duan Wukong crushed a protection talisman without hesitation, creating a barrier of light in front of him before turning to flee. Duan Wukong looked like a stray dog without the slightest bit of elegance of a paragon and was utterly disgraceful. Boom! Su Zimo chased after him and his fist transformed into a gigantic seal that smashed down heavily on Duan Wukong's head. The barrier of light formed by the protection talisman flickered and dimmed significantly. Boom! Yet another punch descended. The barrier of light swayed and blocked the power of the punch once more. However, Duan Wukong lost his balance after receiving such a tremendous impact and staggered, nearly falling to the ground. Su Zimo chased after him quickly and raised his fist, raining punches down on Duan Wukong's figure. Bang! 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 There was a series of collisions. The barrier of light shook violently and finally let out a crisp sound. Snap! A crack appeared on the barrier of light. The glow of the talisman dimmed completely. It was shattered. The protection talisman that his sect left for him that could defend against the power of most perfected Jin Dan was shattered. Duan Wukong's face was ashen. Boom! Yet another punch descended. Duan Wukong's body was torn into pieces and he died on the spot. Taba Feng and the others felt chills run down their spines. It was way too ruthless. A paragon of an ancient aristocratic family was ridden on top of his head and beaten to death with a flurry of punches. On the other side, Ouyang Xiaoyu had long sensed that something was amiss and had already fled far away on the back of the green wan. Su Zimo's gaze shifted. Just as he was about to give chase, he caught sight of someone. A handsome man floated over. He wore a light golden Taoist robe, and his feet didn't touch the ground. His face was sparkling and translucent like jade, flickering with specks of luster, and his eyes were deep like glass. Chapter 559. In a pavilion 5 kilometers away from the Great Qian ruins. The perfected lords of the Duanmu clan and Ouyang clan sat inside with relaxed expressions as they sipped tea leisurely. Although the Jining Jinjuan inside and outside the pavilion looked indignant, they did not dare to leave on their own accord. By now, there were already more than 10 Jining Jinjuan who wanted to challenge the ancient aristocratic families of Duanmu and Ouyang. However, all of them were killed without being able to fight back at all. The number of shattered destiny talismans was still increasing rapidly. Panic, bewilderment, shock and rage spread through the crowd. Even the 3 Jining Jinjuan of Heaven Motion sect, Stellar Luna sect and Dark Ghost sect of the 10 upper sects could only watch helplessly as their destiny talismans shattered, let alone them. The 3 of them had extremely grim expressions. Way too many paragons had died at this point in the fight for the vermilion fruit. Even the paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans were left with only a handful. The few remaining destiny talismans were dark at the moment as well. It was proof that the paragons who were fortunate enough to survive were not in a good situation either. Finally, the perfected lord of the Yuan clan could not hold it in any longer and grit his teeth. Duanmu clan has truly produced a good successor. Isn't this successor of the Duanmu clan a little too ruthless for the sake of a single vermilion fruit? The perfected lord of Blood Mist sect had a terrible expression. Fufu. The perfected lord of Duanmu clan chuckled and shook his head. This is a fight between paragons to begin with and it's extremely fair for everyone. Why should the deaths of your disciples be blamed on the Duanmu clan? The many Jining Jinjuan were silent. No matter what, this was indeed a fair fight between paragons. In their shoes, if they had the chance to kill the paragons of the Duanmu clan, their disciples would not have held back either. The perfected lord of Duanmu clan remarked coldly, "Don't come and fight for the vermilion fruit if you don't have the capabilities." Don't blame others for your death if you dare to fight for the vermilion fruit. Although the words of the perfected lord of Duanmu clan were extremely unpleasant, everyone was speechless. All of a sudden, as though he sensed something, the perfected lord of Duanmu clan frowned and slapped his storage bag, retrieving a destiny talisman. The flickering light on the life talisman dimmed rapidly. Duanmu clan's perfected lord's expression changed. At the same time, Ouyang clan's perfected lord took out a destiny talisman as well. The light of the life talisman was also rapidly fading. Something was wrong. The Duanmu and Ouyang families had been on good terms for generations. Although Duanmu Kang and Ouyang Xiaoyu were not childhood sweethearts, they would never fight each other. In other words, a strong enemy was threatening the two of them. Inside and outside the pavilion, Jining Jinjuan did not say a word, but he was secretly laughing at them. They seemed to be in trouble. The Ouyang clan's true monarch had a grave expression. Duanmu clan's perfected lord frowned. Through the feedback from the life talisman, he could naturally see the problem. However, what puzzled the perfected lord of Duanmu clan was that given Duanmu Kang's strength, who could threaten him in the Great Qian ruins? Furthermore, Duanmu Kang had Ouyang Xiaoyu and two powerful demon beast mounts by his side. Whoosh! Suddenly, the destiny talisman in the hands of Duanmu clan's perfected lord buzzed. Although it seemed soft, it was like a bolt out of the blue in the ears of Duanmu clan's perfected lord. Instinctively, he lowered his head. A series of cracks had already appeared on the destiny talisman that belonged to Duanmu Kang in his palm. This was proof that Duanmu Kang was dead. Duanmu clan's perfected lord was stunned. He was oblivious to the fact that the cracked destiny talisman was falling through the gaps of his fingers. Jining Jinjuan inside and outside the pavilion had a conflicted expression. Although most of them were gloating, they were curious as well. But at the same time, everyone was curious and wanted to know what had happened in the depths of the ruins. Who was it that dared to kill a paragon of an ancient aristocratic family? After a moment of hesitation, Duanmu clan's perfected lord slapped the table and stood up, saying darkly, "There's definitely something strange in the ruins. I've got to check it out. There might be paragons in the north region who can defeat Kang, but I don't believe that there's anyone who can kill him." Hee. Among the crowd, Jining Jinjuan could not help but stifle a chuckle. Who was the one who said earlier on that no Jining Jinjuan was allowed to interfere and enter the Great Qian ruins to ensure the fairness of this battle? That's right. Don't you have any shame for betraying your own words? You guys have a death wish. Duanmu clan's perfected lord was enraged when his sore spot was exposed and his glabella shone as his spirit consciousness burst forth. In the crowd, countless weeds grew beneath the feet of the two Jining Jinjuan who spoke and coiled around the two Jining Jinjuan. Almost instantly, the two of them were sliced apart mercilessly by the weeds and fresh blood gushed out. Ah! 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 The two of them let out tragic cries. No matter how they struggled, they could not break free from the shackles of the weeds, and instead, the weeds tightened around them. The weeds had already dug into their flesh. Poof! Unable to withstand the burden, the two of them were sliced into meat paste by the weeds and scattered all over the ground with a nauseating stench. Does anyone have any objections? Duanmu clan's perfected lord surveyed his surroundings with a murderous aura and asked coldly. Fu. Suddenly, a mocking and sarcastic chuckle rang out. A wizened old man with a skinny face had appeared out of nowhere. His gaze was ancient, as though he could see through everything, as he remarked indifferently, "How impressive." "You are." Duanmu clan's perfected lord froze for a moment. Immediately after, the perfected lord of Duanmu clan's gaze landed on the old man's waist. When he saw the sect badge, Duanmu clan's perfected lord shuddered and exclaimed with disbelief in his eyes, "Glass Palace." Those 3 words seemed to possess a magical power. Instantly, silence filled the entire pavilion. Almost all cultivators who could cultivate to the nascent soul realm had heard of the 9 immortal sections. There was no way Jining Jinjuan, who was in the North region, would not have heard of Glass Palace if he had heard of the 9 immortal sects. That was a true super sect of the North region and a massive entity. May I know which fellow Taoist from Glass Palace you are? Duanmu clan's perfected lord could vaguely sense something and asked with difficulty. I don't have a title. I'm merely an old servant of the young master. The voice of the old man from Glass Palace was still calm. Young master, could it be that he's here? Duanmu clan's perfected lord murmured with a bitter expression. He finally understood who Duanmu Kang was killed by. If that person from Glass Palace had descended upon the great Qian ruins, even 10 Duanmu Kangs would not be a match for him. 30 years ago, that person was the #1 perfected being of the North region. 10 years ago, that person could have advanced to the nascent soul realm. However, he did not take that step because he wanted to enter the ancient battlefield 20 years later. Glass Palace, Shibuya. 30 years ago, he was invincible at the Jin Dan realm in the North region. When the perfected lords of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans heard Shibuya's name, all of them went silent. Ouyang clan's perfected lord sighed gently. If we knew that Shibuya would be here, why would we send our disciples to fight for the vermilion fruit? Wouldn't that be asking for trouble? Chapter 560. The handsome man in faint golden robes strode over in an unhurried manner. His eyes shone like stars and he exuded an indescribable confidence and composure. Ouyang Xiaoyu was riding on the green Wan at full speed, wanting to escape from the great Qian ruins. However, she was stunned when she caught sight of this person. Immediately after, her body shuddered and her eyes were filled with disbelief. Fellow Taoist Ouyang, how have you been? The handsome man smiled gently without dodging or retreating. When he saw the green Wan tearing through the air, he welcomed it. Right in front of countless gazes, the handsome man extended his jade-white palm and raised it, pressing gently towards the void before him. The green Wan was extremely fast and turned into a streak of light. However, at that moment, it came to a sudden stop. Su Zimo could clearly see the green Wan's body shuddering slightly. The pure-blooded ferocious beast was terrified. Demon beasts had an extremely sharp sense towards danger. The reason why the green Wan had such a reaction was definitely because it sensed a strong sense of danger from this handsome man. In front of the handsome man, the green Wan lowered its head motionlessly, as though it did not dare to meet his gaze. All the cultivators were shocked when they saw that. Who was this person that could subdue a pure-blooded ferocious beast without bloodshed by merely extending his palm? Some of the cultivators shifted their gazes towards the sect badge on the handsome man's waist. Someone recognized the background of the handsome man and could not help but shudder. Taba Feng lamented. Even with his arrogant and condescending personality, he shook his head and sighed gently. To think that a single vermilion fruit would alarm him. The #1 perfected being of the North region 30 years ago, Shibuya. Murong Wushuang narrowed her eyes and said word by word. Ouyang Xiaoyu bore with her injuries and stood up, cupping her fists. Greetings, fellow Taoist Shi. Who in the North region would dare to hunt you down, fellow Taoist Ouyang? They truly don't know how to take care of women, Shibuya said with a grin. Ouyang Xiaoyu turned back and glared at Su Zimo hatefully. It was only then that Shibuya's gaze landed on Su Zimo. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged and his gaze was deep as he looked at Shibuya, who was not far away, calmly without any hint of fear in his eyes. Shibuya smiled and walked over slowly. It was only then that everyone noticed that there was a strange cultivator following behind Shibuya, blindly following him. This person was only at the early stage of Jin Dan. He wore a high-collared robe and a mask that covered all his exposed skin except for his eyes. For some reason, Su Zimo's gaze swept past the masked cultivator, and a strange feeling suddenly welled up in his heart. It was indescribable. In the blink of an eye, Shibuya had already arrived. Su Zimo felt goosebumps all over his body. He finally understood how Qing Wan felt. Shibuya exuded an extremely terrifying aura that sent chills down one's spine. Shibuya surveyed his surroundings and asked indifferently, "Who plucked the vermilion fruit?" No one answered. Swish. Swish. However, countless eyes were on Su Zimo. "It's me." Su Zimo knew that he could not hide this matter. Since he did not want to be complacent, he admitted it frankly. "All right," Shibuya nodded. "Hand over the vermilion fruit and kill yourself here. At least, you'll have a complete corpse." "Foo-foo, ha ha ha." Su Zimo chuckled first before rearing his head in laughter. Suddenly, Taba Feng remarked, "Fellow Taoist Shi, you've got to be careful. This is the famous monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island who has been in the limelight for the past few years. Back then, he defeated all the heroes of the world beneath the human emperor's palace. Most of the paragons today have died in his hands as well." The monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island. When he heard those words, Shibuya smiled. There was a hint of mockery and lamentation in his eyes. "What a pity," Shibuya looked at Su Zimo and sighed gently. "You're going to die today." "You? Me?" The two of them exchanged glances with fighting intent rising, neither of them retreated. The crowd began to discuss softly as well. "It's a pity for the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island. Now that his spirit energy is depleted, how can he be a match for Shibuya?" "That's right. If he was in his peak condition, the two of them might be able to fight it out. But now, don't spout nonsense. Even at his peak condition, the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island is definitely not a match for Shibuya." Before the discussions died down, a battle broke out. Shibuya did not move at all and his eyes shone brightly, emitting two divine lights that caused the voids to tremble wherever they passed. Some of the cultivators who were hiding far away were caught off guard and cried out in pain, clutching their eyes. Those cultivators were nearly blinded just by watching the battle. Su Zimo, who was opposite Shibuya, did not move at all and a demonic glint flashed through his eyes. Su Zimo cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness and had shocking eyesight. Shibuya's visual secret skill could not injure Su Zimo at all, nor could it affect his mind. Interesting, Shibuya stomped on the ground and leaped into the air, punching viciously towards Su Zimo, who was in midair. That clenched fist was like a rainbow glass that shone with a resplendent light. It did not seem like a punch, but a blazing sun. Su Zimo was fearless and strode forward as well. Extending his arm that was bulging with green veins, he clenched his fist into a seal and collided with the incoming fist. Boom! There was a deafening sound and the ground quaked. Countless resplendent lights shattered and scattered in midair, resembling fireworks. Amidst the fireworks, the two figures engaged in a massive battle that attracted the attention of countless people. Both of them were body-tempering cultivators and fought in melee combat with their incomparably strong physiques. Each time they collided, the underground palace would tremble. Both of them were way too strong. Just their physique and bloodline alone was enough to shock many cultivators. That monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island is so scary. That's right. He killed countless paragons of the North region and even slaughtered the paragons of the 10 upper sects and 4 gentry clans. To think that he still has the strength to fight against Shibuya. Shibuya hasn't used his trump cards yet and hasn't used his full strength. Once he does, that monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island will definitely die. In reality, Su Zimo was truly drained. After fighting against so many paragons and releasing 2 phenomenons, the spirit energy in his dantian had long been depleted. However, even without spirit energy, Su Zimo was still frightening. Most Jin Dan perfected beings would not be able to withstand the burst of his physique alone. At that moment, Su Zimo was getting braver as he fought. Up till this point of his cultivation, it was rare for him to encounter a cultivator who could match him in terms of body tempering. However, Shibuya's emotions were conflicted right now. Glass Palace was the sect that specialized in body tempering and melee combat in Tianhuang mainland. At the peak of Glass Palace's secret manuals, one could even kill ancient remnant beasts and subdue pure-blooded ferocious beasts. Up till this point of Shibuya's cultivation, he had never met anyone who could match him in melee combat. But now, after encountering Su Zimo, he felt extremely troubled. Tsunami blood. The successor of Divine Phoenix Island had actually cultivated his blood to the Tsunami blood realm. What was even more frightening was that the many melee combat techniques released by the successor of Divine Phoenix Island were extremely strange. They could be tough or soft, resembling anacondas coiling around mountains or agile monkeys climbing rocks. In fact, there were a few times where his life was nearly threatened. In everyone's opinion, it was clear that Su Zimo had already used all his trump cards when he fought against the paragons of the North region and destroyed two primordial phenomenons. Finally, he used the clash of tortoise and snake to kill Duan Mukong. Furthermore, everyone could see that Su Zimo's spirit energy was depleted. Up till this point of the battle, there was almost no spirit energy fluctuation on his body. He was relying entirely on his incomparably strong bloodline and physique to fight in close combat. Fufu. Shibuya chuckled. You have a glib tongue. That's all there is to the monster incarnate of Divine Phoenix Island. Before his sentence was finished, Shibuya's palm landed on his storage bag and he suddenly withdrew a slender jade ruler. It was crystal clear and shone with a mysterious glow. It was extremely extraordinary. Up till this point of the battle, both of them had been fighting barehanded. But now, Shibuya had finally summoned his weapon. You can die a worthy death if you can force me to use my weapon, Shibuya said proudly. Swoosh! The jade ruler was smashed forward like a saber that tore through the air, howling with a shocking aura. Su Zimo narrowed his gaze. That jade ruler was not simple. His spirit perception warned him. Without time to think, Su Zimo retreated. The jade ruler brushed past his face and he felt a burning sensation on his cheeks. The jade ruler quivered gently and a bedazzling light shone on it. 6 spirit patterns, a connate spirit weapon. A series of exclamations broke out from the crowd. Connate spirit weapons were way too rare. Even the paragon successors of the 10 upper sects, for gentry clans and 2 ancient aristocratic families had not summoned them. Although the jade ruler seemed weak, it was an indestructible connate spirit weapon. Thankfully, Su Zimo dodged in time. If he had taken it head-on with his bare hands like before, his arm would have been smashed into smithereens. Shibuya summoned his connate spirit weapon and instantly gained the upper hand. Striding forward, he closed in and swung his jade ruler, slashing forward. A rainbow light spread out from the jade ruler and descended on Su Zimo's head instantly, as though it could penetrate through everything in the world. Su Zimo had long experienced the might of a connate spirit weapon and did not dare to receive it barehanded. Su Zimo withdrew a saber from his storage bag. The saber quivered gently and 4 spirit patterns shone. It was a supreme-grade spirit weapon. Su Zimo swung his saber in reverse and slashed towards the rainbow light released by the jade ruler. Swoosh! The sound of tides surged. Countercurrent stance. Clang! The jade ruler and saber collided, filling the skies with rainbow light and mist. Shatter! Shibuya harumphed coldly and his blood chi burst forth, causing the rainbow light on the jade ruler to shine brightly. Snap! There was a crisp sound. In the blink of an eye, dense cracks appeared on the saber. It was crippled. A supreme-grade spirit weapon was shattered by the jade ruler in Shibuya's hands. Su Zimo retreated once more. Shoo. 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 The saber was shattered into a pile of shards and turned into cold spots of light against the tremendous force, shooting towards Su Zimo. Su Zimo's pupils constricted violently. The distance between the two of them was way too close. The moment the saber and jade ruler collided, the shards of the saber were already flying towards him. There was no time to dodge at all. Suddenly, a series of crackling sounds could be heard from Su Zimo's body. Right in front of countless gazes, that tall figure shrunk into a ball of flesh the size of an infant and spun around. Cling! Clang! The shards of the saber landed on Su Zimo's body but did not penetrate. Instead, the sound of metal clashing could be heard. Su Zimo took a deep breath and his tendons and bones sounded at the same time. In the blink of an eye, he returned to his burly man form. A series of scratches appeared on his green robes but there were no bloodstains. Through his green robes, one could vaguely make out a wisp of golden light. Shi Wuya's eyes lit up as he came to a realization. That's right. So, you're wearing a defensive inner armor. His eyesight was sharp and he could vaguely tell that the grade of Su Zimo's inner armor was rather high. There was a high chance it was a perfect grade spirit weapon. Truly, I've searched high and low for it. Coincidentally, I was lacking a defensive spirit weapon and you've delivered it to me. Shi Wuya could not help but laugh. Let's see how long more you can last. The moment he said that, Shi Wuya's blood chi burst forth and his figure flashed. Waving his jade ruler, endless rays of light shone down on Su Zimo's head and sliced down once more. With a Khanate spirit weapon in hand, Shi Wuya was able to suppress Su Zimo perfectly. End of chapter 1. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.